A real atmosphere of commotion reigned on the site of the pavilion for filming. All the heroes of the film and participants of the filming ran in different directions. Someone picked up minor characters, and someone talked among themselves about famous actors who were still called to the main roles. One young man studied in detail the text that was written in his notebook. Next to him sat a man who was incredibly bored of waiting. He looked at the young man next to him and recognized his old acquaintance. He asked the young man if he was hired again only for the role of mass worker. The young man turned his face to the interlocutor and replied that he was also an actor. The man only laughed at the young man's incomprehensible roles. He, in turn, objected and said that there is a second set of heroes in this film, but he is not going to stop there. The man smiled and said that he did not mind watching these heroes at all. He wished the young man luck, although not very sincerely. The secondary character believed that he could not stay at the bottom forever. On the filming site, an announcement was made that filming would begin in a few minutes. The heroes immediately began to group. Some didn't really like the suits because they were uncomfortable. An order to make silence on the site sounded from the director. The main director of this film was a famous Korean director named Kang. The young man already known to us really wanted to star in his films. Finally, his dream will come true today. Now, the goal of the young man was to get under the gaze of this director so that Khan would remember him in the future. Filming began and the soldiers raised their weapons and flags aloft. A new stage in the young man's life came when he stopped earning $8. So far, the hero has not participated in the scenes. He watched the warriors moving across the field. Everything looked very realistic, even too much. On another front, they noticed how the enemy was rapidly approaching their territory. The men immediately took the stones and went to repel the enemies. It was clear that the battle was inevitable, so it was necessary to prepare, not to panic. Everything that could help the victory was carried to the Great Wall. The archers first met the enemy. They stood on the edge of a high wall and started shooting lighted arrows to sow panic in the ranks of the enemy. The young man from the mask watched the action on the site and was simply shocked by the scale. At yesterday's rehearsal, it seemed to him that there were much fewer people. Despite the huge losses, the enemy continued to advance. He was equipped with rifles and immediately began firing back at the archers. The shots were successful, one after the other. The men on the walls began to die too realistically, which greatly alarmed the young man from the mask. The enemy from below also suffered heavy losses due to their ill-advised attack. Blood continued to flow non-stop on the battlefield, covering the field. Archers who were on the walls were defeated by rifles and began to fall down. The impregnable fortress lost a lot of defenders in the first minutes. The opponent decided to take advantage of the weakness of his enemy and very rapidly began to approach the wall, taking with him a not very modern elevator. The enemy began to put a lot of ladders along the wall so that the soldiers could climb the mountain and finally capture the impregnable fortress. The Allies could not allow their enemies to take over their home so easily. They burned ladders, threw stones, so that the opponent could not find himself on the mountain. Despite the best efforts of the hosts, there were too many enemies to destroy them all. Literally, after a few minutes, the enemy was already on the mountain of the fortress. New warriors appeared in the arena, who suddenly appeared from the tunnel. They came as reinforcements to prevent the enemy's infantry from advancing further. Among these minor heroes was a young man already known to us. He seriously adjusted to the shooting and completely got used to the role of his character. The order to attack the enemy sounded, and a huge horde of armed men rushed towards the wall to repel the enemy's surprise attack. The young man immediately took the weapon in his hands and rushed to the duel together with his allies. He seemed to live every second of a real war. The man who played the role next to the young man wanted to destroy everyone. The young man was even surprised that everyone on the set gave 100%. Suddenly, on the battlefield, the participants could hear the pounding of hooves. Someone approached very quickly on horseback to be able to swim in the course of the fight. One of the enemy leaders found himself as close as possible to the rear of the enemy and unexpectedly struck a blow that turned out to be fatal. In this scene, one of the men who was constantly giving orders died. A wound opened on his neck, with which it was virtually impossible to survive. It was just an incredible sight, as if a real action movie was being filmed. Everything looked so real that it deserved an Oscar. The fighting near the fortress became more and more intense. All around was the constant clatter of metal weapons hitting each other. The enemy continued to advance on the fortress, trying to capture it. Thanks to its mobile power, it seemed quite real in the last minutes. The young man from the crowd was amazed at the reality of everything that was happening around him. He mentioned that at this moment, the shooting of this scene was about to end. Turning his head in different directions, the young man did not see either the assistants or the director, which seemed very strange because they were giving commands to the actors. The young man decided that he could manage without their help. At the end of this scene, he was supposed to die, so he fell to his knees and began writhing in pain in his left side. A warrior who was defending his home died from his wound. The young man fell with his head down and closed his eyes so that no onlooker would suspect his death. He lay there for some time and suddenly heard loud screams. This seemed very strange, since the scene should have ended about a few minutes ago. The young man opened his eyes and did not understand what was happening. They spent much less time on stage than was done in rehearsals before. Loud shouts of victory from the Allies rang out all around. There were enemy corpses on the battlefield which the enemy could no longer take away. The owners of the fortress somehow managed to win this difficult battle. Now they drove their enemies away and ordered them not to return. Some warriors even began to cry from happiness. It was the hardest battle of the entire war. The warriors could not contain their emotions from the fact that they won the victory. The young man from the group still could not understand anything. The end of the scene seemed to be nearing the end, but the people around continued to emotionally congratulate each other on the victory. The young man decided to approach one of the actors and inform him about the end of the scene. He put his hand on the man's body and told him that you can get up now. Despite the message, the man was in no hurry to get up. The young man continued to wake him up and suggested that he might have fallen asleep on the set. While the young man was shaking the man, he saw a huge amount of blood near him and was really shocked because a lot of money had to be spent on special effects. Turning the man's face towards him, the young man suddenly realized that it was not at all like special effects. Real human blood was really flowing in front of him. Out of horror and surprise, the young man grabbed his face with his hand. He could barely contain the emotions that were literally mixed up inside his soul. The actor's whole body began to tremble. He slowly raised his right hand to bring it closer to the man who lay motionless directly in front of him. The young man raised his trembling limb to the motionless man's face. He didn't feel a single breath, but he still couldn't believe the reality. The young man first put his fingers to his neck where he did not feel any pulse. He then felt the man's face, which was incredibly cold. Now the secondary actor began to realize that he was not on the set at all, considering this corpse. The young man was simply shocked that the man in front of him was not breathing. He could not understand how the playground could turn into a real battlefield. The actor began to sweat incredibly from the experience. His body continued to shake and let out uncontrollable impulses that worked as a protective response. The young man was sitting over the dead man's body. He was really dead, and it was impossible to bring a dead actor back to life, even on the set. The young man from the mask still could not believe what he saw with his own eyes. His body continued to shake for several minutes. The actor could not say a word in the next few minutes. He just continued to sit over the dead body, trembling with fear. A few more minutes passed after that. Finally, the young man began to calm down, and the trembling began to slowly disappear. The fear also went somewhere. It was hard to believe, but the young man began to put up with the fact that the actor died on the set. Time cannot be turned back. The young man left the man on the floor and stood up to his full height. So far, he had not paid attention to how many corpses were still lying around him. Allies around began to clear the territory. They took up their swords and began to finish off those enemies who were still breathing. The men began searching the bodies of the dead and identifying their faces. It was very unpleasant to look at the brothers with whom I spoke literally yesterday. The Allies began to drag the bodies away to the rear to bury them. At the same time, they cursed the enemies who unjustly took their lives. Vaguely hear the conversations behind him. All his attention was focused on thinking about where he was now. Seeing that one of the soldiers could not regain consciousness at all, the man decided to help him and, approaching from behind, put his hand on his shoulder. The young man was startled when he heard a familiar voice behind him. He immediately cast his frightened gaze back to where his ally was stationed. His eyes were as blank as possible and radiated fear. It was the view of a man who had taken part in real combat for the first time during the war. Turning back, the young man saw in front of him the same man with whom he communicated on the set and who criticized him for his secondary role. The young man recognized the man and called him Mr. Kim. He asked the boys if he could hear him at all. The young man answered yes. After that, the soldier informed his ally that in front of them was a dead man whom he had seen alive just a few minutes ago. The young man was in absolute shock and tried to form at least 2 words. He wanted the man to help him do something with this corpse. The interlocutor silently looked at the young man with a cold gaze. He was not surprised by the deaths, which were an absolutely normal phenomenon during the war. The man decided to calm down the inexperienced warrior and put his confident hand on his shoulder again, asking the young man to let this situation go. The supporting actor was simply shocked by such a reaction. He thought that now the man would call an ambulance or at least try to save him on his own. Tears began to appear in the young man's eyes. Emotions literally spilled out. The young man was angry with the man who did not want to do anything in this situation. The man did not want to see the soldier's emotions get out. He punched the newcomer in the face to bring him back to real life. Kim reminded the young man that they are now at war, so they need to pull themselves together and accept the deaths of their allies. The man also added that every day they lose hundreds or even thousands of soldiers on the battlefield who did not want to see such emotions from their fellow soldiers. After these words, the secondary actor fell to the ground and grabbed her with his palms. He began to squeeze them tightly, driving the earth under his nails. The man understood that the newcomer needed some time to think everything over. As he was just waiting, two warriors with sticks behind their backs passed by. They looked askance at the young man and also said that he should disappear before the deaths in the war, because he would have to see more than one such scene. The secondary actor did not want to believe his allies. He wanted to believe that he was in a terrible dream, where nothing threatened him. The young man now wanted to wake up most of all, but he could not control this process in any way. He raised his eyes, which were completely covered with tears. The hero looked around and again saw many corpses that had not yet been removed. His hopes of a nightmare began to slowly fade. Turning his head to the other side, the young man again met the body of his dead brother, whom he tried to save at any cost. The newcomer could not control his emotions again and began to cry. He tried to calm himself down and not show others his true inner state. He was not very good at it. The external state spoke for itself, and one of the allies suddenly began to notice something strange with the newcomer. The next second of his life, the young man woke up on the cold ground. He opened his eyes and felt hot sweat running down his body in contrast. He immediately jumped up from his seat and remembered the terrible dream that was in his head. The young man thanked God for taking him away from the war. It was still too early to rejoice. The hero looked around and realized that he was on the street. It was a very strange phenomenon. Besides, it was deep night outside. The young man suddenly noticed someone's figure in front of him and realized that he was not alone. Without looking straight ahead, the young man saw a small shadow of a child approaching in his direction. They were somewhere far away in a dense forest. When the child took a few more steps forward, the young man could see her face. It was a little girl, about 4 years old, who was holding something strange in her hands. It was a bowl of food that didn't look like normal food at all. There was water hanging inside, in which some additional ingredients were found here and there. The young man silently looked at the girl, who continued to move towards him. He tried to understand whether reality had turned its back on him again. The hero had terrible pictures from his past in his head, where he saw corpses in front of him. It was impossible to forget such moments from life. The minor character saw his own face in his head. He looked very frightened and was shaking with fear when he realized his true situation. The young man came to terms with his current situation, and opening his eyes, saw a man in front of him who passed by and did not react in any way. The novice stopped his ally and asked him to give him literally a second. He asked the stranger what happened to Mr. Kim. The man turned to face the interlocutor and only shook his head in response, announcing that the earthly path for their ally was over. The young man realized that he was using too many words and became bored. He cast his empty gaze downwards, begging God to return everything to the way it was. He stayed with the little girl in the forest. There was absolutely no soul around who understood his feelings and could support him. The child felt that the young man was very worried. The girl moved closer to her brother and took his hand to calm him down. She looked into the man's eyes with her kind eyes, as if asking him to calm down and accept everything as if it had already happened. After this look, the girl turned her back to the man and did nothing else. The young man remembered that he had seen this girl in some scene. He looked to his left where his dining table was. There was a bowl of soup and a spoon for the wounded warrior to eat. The young man's stomach really wanted to be strengthened, but he himself refused to eat, since he could not think about absolutely anything at that moment. Turning his head in the other direction, the newcomer heard the loud shouts of his allies, who were lighting fires and telling stories to each other after the battle. The men were satisfied that they could at least survive this fight. They were showing off. They managed to get away with only a small injury. Next, the young man saw a woman kneeling in front of her dead husband and crying bitterly. She could not accept that she would never see her beloved again. A little further on was the medical station, where soldiers were still being bandaged. Someone even had to amputate his arm so that he could continue a normal existence. Many wounded came out of this battle. The war-hardened men looked very disfigured, especially with the bandages on their faces. The warriors who managed to get out of today's fight unscathed stood silently in their places and illuminated the area so that the allies could see something. While the young man was looking at the surrounding camp with tears in his eyes, someone was slowly approaching him, walking with huge boots on the cold ground. The newcomer suddenly noticed a male figure in front of him, who began to speak to him. The stranger advised the wounded man to have a little snack in order to recover. At that moment, the young man looked up and decided to see who had come to him. The voice seemed very familiar to him. He had definitely heard it somewhere before. Seeing his mentor in front of him, the young man's eyes brightened a little. He could breathe a sigh of relief that at least his mentor was still alive. The young man's mentor was Kim Manjin. In their previous rehearsals, he had always played the main character, but now nothing was unclear. The man decided to talk a little with the wounded man and sat down next to him. He rested his hand on the ground to fall smoothly and slowly to the ground. Kim Manjin told his charge to gather his strength. He said that soon the prince will ascend the throne and his army will definitely help them in the current war. The mentor asked the young man not to lose his temper and live to the moment of coronation. He reminded that they are all fighting for their fortress and their homeland. The young man really felt a little relieved after this conversation. A drop of hope flashed in his eyes, which was caused by just one successful dialogue. Kim Manjin, after sitting for a few minutes, got up from his seat and asked his ward to constantly remember these words when he would have a hard time. After tapping the young man on the shoulder, the mentor left him on the bed. Kim Manjin moved on to inspect a few more wards. The young man looked at the back of his mentor and followed him with his gaze. He did not understand what he should do at all because he got into a completely different world. In the end, the novice decided to listen to the advice from the mentor and took a spoon to get a little refreshment and gain strength before tomorrow. He paused for a second, not really wanting to bring the spoon to his mouth. The soup looked completely unattractive and didn't smell very good either. Despite this, the young man still dared to try this dish. Dripping with sweat, he swallowed a spoonful of soup, which he forced into his mouth. After that, goosebumps ran through his body from the not very good taste. He certainly didn't live long in his past life, but this soup was not edible at all. When the young man ate a spoonful of soup, a little girl came up to him and, calling him brother, asked where he came to the war from. The newbie felt a little uncomfortable. Scratching his face, he told the girl that he used to live in Hanyan, where a completely peaceful life reigns. The girl's eyes lit up from the young man's short story. In a shrill voice, she said that she also wanted very much to visit Hanyan City. The young man promised the interlocutor that the girl would definitely visit the capital. Mala smiled pleasantly and asked if the young man was really telling the truth. The warrior replied that he would definitely go there with the girl. Mala took a promise from her interlocutor that they would go there immediately after the end of the war. The young man looked at the girl with a sympathetic look and understood that she had not even gone to school, but had already learned all the worst horrors of this life. Despite this, her look remained extremely kind and childlike. The girl lived ordinary dreams, which are characteristic of most of her peers. The young man felt something very strange inside. These were emotions of pity and fear, which were very real for an ordinary dream. The warrior once again decided to check everything with his own eyes. His feelings were too real for sleep, and besides, he knew all the allies here. Looking to one side, the young man saw a man named Seokjun, whom he met more than once on the set and even spoke to several times. He also saw Mr. Sangi, who was trying to warm himself by the fire. A woman was sitting next to him, who was also recognized by a newcomer in the ranks. After turning his head a little more, the young man realized that almost all the faces were familiar to him. He could not understand how one could come to any conclusion. While the allies were healing their wounds and resting, the enemy decided to stay awake. One of the enemy's soldiers fired an arrow in the direction of the camp where the opponents were. The young man immediately noticed a strange glow in the air. He did not understand what it all meant, so he was in no hurry to take any measures. Instead, the girl, who was always next to the young man, understood everything perfectly. She told her brother to hide, covering him with her body. The young man understood absolutely nothing. He had a few seconds to escape, but he didn't, and thus made a fatal mistake. The girl who tried to save her new friend took the hit. She covered the friend with an arrow that landed right in her back. The newcomer was simply shocked by this turn of events. He looked at his friend with frightened eyes and began to worry about her. Despite the unbearable pain, the girl continued to smile. She turned to her brother and asked him to fulfill her last wish. Blood began to flow from her mouth. With her last strength, the girl asked her brother to show her the capital, at least not with her eyes, which she will not be able to discover again. The young man was under incredible stress at that moment. His eyes widened with the fear of death, and bitter tears rolled straight to the ground. The novice screamed in this hopeless situation, feeling incredibly terrible emotions inside him. Now he had to see the death of a small child. Suddenly, the young man moved to a completely different location. The director gave the team a shot and praised all the actors for a job well done. The actor opened his eyes, from which tears continued to flow, and looked around. He did not understand how he ended up on the set again. He held in his arms a little girl who had just died. In this reality, she was alive and asked her husband to release her from his arms. Here, the girl behaved very arrogantly. She broke out of her husband's arms and headed for her well-deserved rest after filming. The young man was simply shocked by this turn of events. He suddenly felt his strength leave him and began to lean to the side, losing his balance. Without noticing it, the minor actor found himself lying on the ground. He stared blankly in front of him and was now thinking of absolutely nothing. The young man had no strength left to at least understand something in this reality. He slowly began to close his eyes and sink into a deep, long sleep. The editing and processing studio began its activities after the final day of filming ended. Finally, the most interesting part began. Inside, the studio was equipped with everything necessary to comfortably work with video. Now I was carefully watching fragments of the film on the monitors. The chief director sat near 3 large monitors and carefully selected moments. Suddenly, he called his wards to him and asked them to review with him. The man pressed the rewind button several times to rewind to the moment he liked the most, but it was not part of the script at all. 2 assistants immediately approached the director and stood near his chair. They started watching intently the moment the director turned it on. The famous director and critic Khan watched this moment several times and could not understand what happened during one of the scenes. After reviewing the fragment several times, Khan leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly, intending to clarify a few points. He turned to his charges and, without removing his glasses, asked them if they knew who even played the given part. One of the men behind the director just shook his head. He asked what I meant by Khan in general and what specifically he wanted to know. The director pointed a finger at the crying face of the protagonist of this scene. He spoke about a talented young man who played his part incredibly. The assistant felt a little uncomfortable in front of his boss because he did not know the actor's name. He explained to the director that it was only a secondary role. Khan replied that he understood the situation perfectly and let his ward go. Then the man began to think about why the young man got such a small role. The director could not understand how an ordinary guy from a mask could play such a cool secondary role that no one needed. Khan understood that this part was left out of the plot, so he would have to work hard to somehow use it in the track. Meanwhile, the young man who played an incredibly minor role was returning home on the bus. There was absolutely not a soul around. The actor was very tired for today, so he decided to lean his head back and rest a little on the way home. He really did look incredibly tired, considering his adventures today. The young man still could not believe that something like this had happened to him. He began to think that he might be out of his mind. The last thing he saw was like a terrible dream, and then he woke up again in real life. What happened in a dream and still did not give peace to the young man just from one thought about the past, his body began to shake from the experience. At the moment when the young man started scrolling through these moments in his head, the driver of the commercial vehicle pressed the stop button to drop off the passenger. The bus began to slow down near the final stop. He lived on the outskirts of the city, as housing closer to the center was too expensive. With leisurely steps, the young man began to head for the exit. Only when the driver hurried him, the passenger finally sped up and left the vehicle. The young man walked forward and did not pay attention to anything at all. He thought about what would happen to his psyche and life next. The masked actor stopped and remembered asking himself whether he would be able to continue acting in the movies at all if he were to dream of such situations. Trying to let go of this situation, the young man stepped forward again. He wanted to convince himself that it was really just a terrible dream. With similar thoughts and beliefs, the actor reached his final destination. He stopped again and plunged into his deep thoughts. The young man raised his head and looked at the high-rise building in which he lived. Everything seemed different to him now after the terrible dream. The house in which he lived for several years seemed too comfortable to him today. It was very difficult for the young man to explain this feeling. Entering the house and then his apartment, the actor threw his backpack on the floor without thinking. Similar actions took place with him on a machine gun. After that, the young man went to his bed, where he comfortably moved and once again plunged into thinking about what reality he could be in. After lying like this for several minutes, the young man did not come to any conclusion. He still did not understand absolutely anything, and did not know how to proceed. His gaze rested on one spot on the ceiling. This continued for several minutes until suddenly his eyes shone with other colors. The minor actor abruptly rose from his bed to test his own hypotheses. He mentioned that he lives in the 21st century, where absolutely everything is possible. The young man got up and went to his desk, where there was a personal computer. He pressed the system unit button to turn on his computer. After that, the actor picked up the mouse and immediately went to the browser. He needed information that would provide some explanation or simplification of his assumption. For several minutes, the young man was thinking about what to ask Google. He tried to formulate the thought as precisely as possible in order to get an answer. First, the actor Googled movies in real life and started reading articles about overwork. It did not suit him at all. Then the young man began to read information about incomprehensible phenomena that can affect the past and the future, but he also could not find anything interesting. Forget to read about hallucinations. He even tried to find a cure for what was happening to him, but it was all in vain. After spending several hours searching for information, the young man was completely disappointed. Even the internet couldn't answer the question in his head. The young man let out a slow breath and admitted that he was too tired today, so he needed to rest a bit, as he had major work ahead of him tomorrow. The actor immediately went to bed, turned off the computer, and woke up the next morning, where he was greeted by the sun and the incredible vibe of the morning city. There were a lot of high-rise buildings in Hanyang, which completely surrounded the city. For an ordinary average person, it was an absolutely gray and mundane city. To the young man who had just woken up, this city was exactly the same. However, this morning, he again felt incredibly strange sensations playing inside him. The actor suddenly felt hunger in his stomach because he did not get enough of the soup. The young man reached for his wallet, where he found several large bills. Immediately after that, a pleasant smile appeared on his face. He could afford to have a snack before work so that he wouldn't collapse after it. Suddenly, the young man remembered that he wanted to visit the hospital in the coming days. He did not have enough money for this, so he decided to postpone this issue for now. The young man stood right in the middle of the city, scrolling further plans in his head. He came to the conclusion that he was going to the hospital after all. After that, the non-professional actor turned his feet in the other direction and stepped forward. He needed not to be late for work. A lot of people who were also busy with their own affairs were coming to meet the young man. Someone was just walking down the street, and someone was in a hurry to get to work. Literally in a few minutes, the young man was already at his workplace. He worked with machines, which he serviced quite a lot during the working day. Arriving at work, the young man immediately began to wash cars with a rag. His job was to leave the customer with a clean and shiny car. This is how the young man spent almost every day. After working the car with a rag, he took a hose and thoroughly washed everything. The working day went very long. Finally, the boss allowed his ward to go home and praised him for today's work. The young man said goodbye to his boss and left for additional work. The filming site was the place with which the boy wanted to connect his life. Arriving at the site tonight, the young man noticed that almost nothing had changed from what he could observe here yesterday. The secondary actor went to his usual place on the bench. He slowly sat down, where there was absolutely no soul around him. Before each shooting, the young man took out the script and studied it carefully. This evening was no exception, and he reached into his backpack for papers. Suddenly, one of the representatives of the film crew interrupted him. He apologized to the supporting actor and asked what his name was. The young man looked at the man in surprise and introduced himself as Ki-man's son. He was generally unknown to anyone and did not understand why he should mention his name. The man was very happy to hear the name of the interlocutor. He said that the director has been looking for a young man for several hours, and I can't wait for him. Ki-man Song was very surprised, but he couldn't just refuse. He naturally followed the man to meet Director Khan. The young man simply stepped forward and could not understand what was happening at all. His life lately has become a mystery, even for himself. Suddenly, the secondary actor caught his breath from what he saw in front of him, and his eyes seemed to shine with bright colors. He saw in front of him the main director Khan, with actor Kim Myung-jin standing next to him. The men were chatting pleasantly about something. Kim Myung-jin was a very famous actor in the city, and in the country in general. He immediately noticed how someone was approaching him and his interlocutor. The man immediately fell silent and looked in the direction of the young man. He also nodded his head to his interlocutor, indicating the invited guest. Khan also turned his head in Kai's direction. Man Sana realized that it was time to end the dialogue because he had other things waiting for him. Kim Myung-jin said goodbye to his friend and wished him luck today. Khan promised his friend to call later. Kim Young-jin also saw the recent video and understood that the director had urgent business. He said goodbye and went to meet the young man. The man slowly walked forward, looking down. He exhaled slowly, intending to say a few pleasant words to the promising actor. Kai Man-song was simply shocked when his idol spoke to him. The young man stood with his mouth open and could not utter a word in response. Kim Young-jin instead smiled pleasantly and praised the young man for his performance yesterday. He called her truly perfect and unforgettable. After that, the famous actor put his hand on the young man's shoulder and wished him luck in today's shooting, hinting at something more. Kai Man-song still couldn't say a word. He just looked at the famous actor with a surprised look and an open mouth. Suddenly, the young man heard the main director of the film calling him for the second time. The actor immediately came to his senses and realized that he needed to control himself. Kim Myung-jin apologized to the young man for confusing him. Ki Man-song bowed before the star and said that he was honored. After that, the young man quickly ran in the direction of the director. He shuffled his feet as quickly as possible so as not to make Mr. Khan wait too long. Khan was still in his place and asked the young man to take his time, lest he turn his neck. He perfectly understood the excitement of a minor actor. When the young man came closer, the director asked him to sit down. After that, Khan announced the incredible news, offering the actor an important role. Kai Man-song really nearly fell off his feet at this news. He asked the director if he had really mixed up any actors. Hearing a clear and affirmative answer, the young man was incredibly happy. He finally achieved his goal and got a role for which he will not be ashamed. Khan watched the young man with a smile on his face. He perfectly understood what it means for a mask actor to go to a completely different level. Khan explained that his role in the film will not be the main one, but it is very important from the point of view of the plot, as it involves several dialogues. Ki Man-song was incredibly happy for such an opportunity. He literally lit up with happiness and thanked the director, promising not to disappoint him. Khan replied that he fully trusted the young man and hoped for his talent. He understood that the young man could really show his best in this film. Ki Man-song was so happy that he even forgot to ask what the role was. Having calmed down a little, the young man still asked this question to the main director. Khan, without thinking for a long time, answered that the young man would play the role of a prisoner of war who would endure a lot and then die after terrible torture. The next scene was shot under the glow of a full moon. Absolute darkness reigned around, which added uniqueness to the final stage of this scene. Except Ki Man-sona, several other people participated in this scene. They began to tie them to chairs so that it was necessary. Ki Man-sun sat motionless in his seat and watched as he was tied up. First, they tied his hands without being able to move them. After that, the young man's legs were also tied to the chair. He could not move at all, which greatly alarmed the beginner. Ki Man-song asked the authors if they tied him too tightly. The man replied that otherwise the actor might just break out during the game. Of course, this had its own meaning. The young man was very worried about his situation. He was no longer so happy to participate in the scene. Kai Man-sun decided to pull himself together and took a deep breath. Exhaling slowly, the young man began to calm himself. He understood that he had worked too long to get this role, so he couldn't just give it up because of some inexplicable mental disorder. While one of the actors was thinking, the main director gave the order to start shooting, which scared the secondary actor even more. The camera crew was right in front of the actors' faces and shone a special flashlight into their faces, which made it even more creepy. Ki Man-song suddenly began to close his eyes. The film crew seemed to blur right in front of him. Absolutely all the people in front of my eyes disappeared. In front of the young man now was a completely different filming site. All he could see before him was an eerie glow and nothing else. Ki Man-song began to understand that his consciousness had reawakened and brought him to a completely different world where he would not be able to control anything. Realizing this, the young man's body began to tremble incredibly. He swallowed slowly, trying not to show his emotions too soon. Raising his eyes up, the actor saw the sharp blade of the sword which reflected the moon below him. On the young man's face there was a hopeless smile. The actor who played the role of a bad guy began to demand from his captives information that would help them destroy the enemy once and for all. The prisoners did not agree to such an agreement. They started screaming, wishing for death. Kai Man-song sat silently in his seat for now. The man with the sword in his hands began to lick his weapon, hinting at a not-so-pleasant development of events. He wasn't going to play prisoners' games. It was after this moment that it was time for Ki's words, Man-sona. The young man could not speak a word for some time, as he was in incredible fear. The actor still said his text, but not very confidently. He himself could not understand why his voice trembled and his body did not obey at all. Ki Man-sona joined his allies and sent the enemy away. After that, he collected saliva in his mouth and spat in the direction of the man. Saliva landed directly on the opponent's right cheek. The man slowly raised his hand to his face and wiped the foul liquid from his face. This incident made him very angry. He looked at the captives in a completely different way and said that they themselves chose this path. Kaiman Song closed his eyes and began to convince himself that this was just an act of actors, which in his mind sounded too realistic. No matter how much the young man convinced himself of this, the man was not going to wait. He swung his sword to finish off the captives. Kaiman Song watched his enemy's actions with frightened eyes. He waited for the man to stop, but the blade of the sword continued to move forward. The actor realized that his face was not going to joke at all. A human scream rang out on the set, which shocked the young man. He saw in front of him a pool of blood, which had formed after the death of one of his allies, who most wanted to kill him on the spot. Kaiman Song now simply could not convince himself that he was on the set. His mind was occupied only with thoughts of imminent death. He watched his allies die and knew that sooner or later he would be next. It was not at all like the usual performance of actors. The young man's body began to tremble again in anticipation of death. Kaiman's son very much regretted accepting the offer from the famous director. The man with the sword came closer and closer to the young man. He approached the man on the left, who also realized that death was inevitable for him. Kaiman Song was sitting nearby when the loud scream rang out. He jumped up, not expecting such a real acting game. The young man completely lost control and did not know what to do in this situation. Meanwhile, the man with the sword continued to ask questions. Not getting any useful information, he swung his sharp weapon again and again, leaving only the dead bodies of the captives. This time the same thing happened again. The enemy cut off the head of one of the prisoners for keeping silent. At the moment of impact, the body was completely separated from the head. Kaiman Song seemed to feel this pain on himself. At this point, he began to plead with the man to stop, as he no longer wanted to look at the victims. The young man realized that people were really being killed with a sword on the set. He clenched his right fist and shouted orders to stop. It was a real historical moment for a minor actor. Kaiman Song let out all his emotions, even letting out tears from his eyes. Despite this, the man with the sword continued to mutilate the captives. On the set, the blood of one of the hostages was spilled again on the chairs. Just in front of Kaiman's son, landed on the body of his ally, who was sitting next to him. He fell to the floor completely dead and motionless. The young man looked at the man's body with frightened eyes and continued to cry. It was an absolutely hopeless situation for all the prisoners. The actor realized that he would not be able to escape from captivity. He clenched his teeth and began to get angry, gaining acting momentum in his mind. Kaiman's son at some point became like a demon. He looked at the enemy with his sinister gaze and called him an emotionless bastard. The man opposite really was such a person. He looked at the young man completely calmly, wondering why he suddenly began to scream. The enemy took several steps forward and offered the prisoner to cooperate. He promised to spare his life in exchange for important information. The man wanted to know where the secret path led to the fortress they wanted to capture. The enemy needed to have an advantage and go to the rear of the enemy. Despite all the threats, Kaiman Song did not split after all. He said that he would not say a single word and asked to finish him on the spot. The man looked at the young man with his indifferent gaze and gave him one last chance to save his life and the lives of 2 more allies. Kaiman Song once again loudly shouted that he would not agree to these conditions under any circumstances. Hearing the answer, the enemy immediately swung his sword for the fatal blow. The secondary actor looked at the sharp weapon that was moving in his direction and hoped to the last that the man would stop and finish. Realizing that death was inevitable, the young man began to remember his parents, to whom he apologized for his negligence and premature death. He recalled how he didn't like doing homework at school and thus let his parents down. He also apologized to the elders for this. Due to his failures in studies and lack of money, the young man was forced to go to serve in the army, where he was paid quite good money. The first days he felt very uncomfortable. Here he met his first love named Se-en, who paid no attention to him at all. However, after some time, he was still able to confess his feelings to the girl. After that, they did not see each other, and the young man wondered what she was doing now. Kaiman Song suddenly snapped back to reality and wondered why he was remembering all these moments. The young man did not want to die since he had achieved absolutely nothing in life. The enemy across the street did not care about the prisoner's opinion. Without hesitation, he cut off the young man's head, taking his short life. The actor's head fell to the floor and he could look up at his body. He couldn't understand how he was still alive after that. Suddenly, the stop phrase of filming was heard on the set. Ki Man-song opened his eyes wide in surprise and did not understand what was happening. He caught a lot of looks from the crew. All the people around stood with their mouths wide open and could not express their emotions of delight. People began to applaud the young man, who simply played his role incredibly. The applause spoke for itself. No words can express such a game. Kim Myung-jin was on the set and applauded along with everyone. He again praised the young man for his performance and said that he had no doubts. Director Khan was no less pleased than his friend. There were loud shouts and cheers that were dedicated to only one person on the set. Suddenly, one of the members of the film crew approached the main culprit of the event and realized that something was wrong with him. He immediately informed the director about it. Khan was simply shocked by such news. He did not understand what was happening and quickly headed in the direction of the young man to help him. A member of the film crew, who was near the secondary actor, could not understand what was happening. The young man did not react at all. He tried to wake up the actor, but he just sat with his head down. Kim In-sun was unconscious and could not hear the man's words. A crew member immediately informed the director that their actor had lost consciousness and needed to be taken to the nearest hospital immediately. Wasting no time, the crew called an ambulance. Kim In-sun was taken to the hospital. He had to undergo a short course of treatment. The young man was lying under the drip and fast asleep. At some point, he began to stir, and his disgruntled face began to sweat profusely in his sleep. Suddenly, the actor opened his eyes wide. They looked as scared as possible, as if he had been having nightmares for several hours. He got up from his bed covered in sweat. Ki Man-song did not understand where he was at all. It took him a few minutes to regain consciousness. The young man reached his hand to his neck and made sure that it was intact. He remembered that a few minutes ago on the set his head was cut off. Ki Man-song could not understand what had happened to him. While he was stroking his neck, a woman's voice spoke to him from across the ward. Turning his head to the right, the young man saw a woman sitting next to him on a chair. He was incredibly surprised that someone was sitting next to him. The actor knew a woman named Ko Ju-en. He did not understand why she had suddenly visited him and assumed that it could still be a dream. Ki Man-song immediately tried to regain consciousness by patting his face. He achieved absolutely no result, and everything remained the same. The young man touched his neck again, remembering the last events of his life. Ko Ju-en looked at the patient and did not understand what was happening. The actor finally started a dialogue with his visitor. In a low and husky voice, he asked the woman if he was really alive. Ko Ju-en was even more surprised after this question. She looked at the young man with frightened eyes and thought that he had completely lost his mind. Having remained silent for several seconds, the woman slowly exhaled and came to the conclusion that the young man was simply overtired and could not really perceive the situation. She took out a can of coffee from her bag and handed it to the patient. Ki Man-sun could not refuse, and of course took the power plant for himself. Ko Ju-en decided to move on to the good and praised the young man for his incredible performance. With a smile on her face, she congratulated the actor on his incredible debut. After that, the woman simply got up from her seat and headed towards the door. Ki Man-song did not understand why she came to him in the first place. The young man scratched his head and wondered what was going on. It was as if he was again in a dream where he did not understand or control anything. The next day, 2 more people came to visit the young man. He by no means expected to see in front of him such respectable and famous visitors. Chief Director Khan was one of them. He was very concerned about the well-being of the young man, as he wanted to use him in several more roles in his film. Ki Man-song listened carefully to the man and did not even blink. He did not know what to answer, but he simply could not refuse such a favorable offer. Another visitor was actor Kim Myung-jin. He fully supported his friend and young man, whom he considered incredibly talented. After Ki Man-sun was released from the hospital and immediately went to the set, there he played several more roles very successfully. Of course, the young man's life was left out of the frame. He continued to work at a car wash. This work is incredibly tired of him. The actor's days flew by as inconspicuously as possible. Every day he went to work, and in the evening he went to the set of Director Khan. Several months passed and winter imperceptibly knocked on the windows. The leaves on the trees have fallen. All plants have prepared for cold weather, which always comes unexpectedly. Ki Man-song went on to star in a film directed by Khan. The shooting was already coming to an end. The young man constantly felt as confused as possible. The film crew was in the west of his acting, but the actor himself was constantly experiencing an incredible range of emotions, which completely exhausted him. Finally, almost all the scenes of the film were shot. The chief director thanked all those present, inviting them to a preview in the cinema. On the eve of the screening, the cinema was very noisy. Everyone was talking about the movie, which should be incredibly interesting and touch a huge audience. All over the cinema and on the streets of the city, there were posters about the movie called Hangju Mountain Fortress, the events of which took place in 1593. Kim Un-sung came to the preview at the invitation of director Khan. He stood in the central hall and looked at the poster in front of him. He was incredibly pleased that the film will be released very soon. It was his first incredible achievement in life. Suddenly, the young man heard a familiar female voice calling his name. At first, he did not understand who it was and acted very confused. Kai Man-song abruptly turned his head back and met his old acquaintance. The young man could not gather his strength and started dialogue normally. He saw Ko-ju in front of him and simply froze in place. The woman waved to the young man and immediately inquired about his well-being. Ko-ju-an asked the actor what he was doing here. The young man began to mumble and did not give a clear answer to the question of his interlocutor. Ko-ju-an decided not to wait for an answer from the young man and took him with her to the hall. On the way, she said he just couldn't miss the movie preview. The show was supposed to start literally in a matter of minutes. A woman saved one of the actors of this film when she pulled him into the auditorium in time. An almost full hall of people gathered and the lights went out in the hall. The name of the film, which was filmed and edited very recently, appeared on the screen. People could observe events that happened as if in real life. The moment came when a man with a sword began to cut down the prisoners. The audience was amazed by the realism of this film. They looked at the severed head and were ready to believe that all these events happened in reality. This was followed by an acting performance by an unknown young man. He was so emotional and open that his performance won the hearts of many viewers. People did not want to believe that this young man would die. They literally fell in love with this actor and wanted the director to give him a chance to appear in the next scenes. The audience began to discuss among themselves the name of this actor. Absolutely none of those present knew the newcomer, whose acting was at an incredible level. They saw on the screen real emotions that could not be expressed in words. Kim Un-sung fell into the hearts of all the people who carefully watched the film. Spectators opened their mouths wide and looked at the screen. Their hearts were conquered by a young man who appeared only for a few minutes, but that was enough. After this scene, the allies in the film won. The enemies were defeated, but the audience still mourned the young man who died by the sword. The soldiers of the fortress were incredibly happy, literally jumping up. The event was colossal for them, because they were able to defeat a much larger army. The soldiers were ready to cry with emotion. The audience saw it, but such emotions could not be compared with the young man who literally lived this film. The screening of the film quickly came to an end and the lights began to shine on the stage. The audience began to applaud loudly, thanking the creators of this incredible masterpiece. However, the preview did not end there. A whole team of people began to appear on the stage and greeted the people in the hall. The presenter of this event appeared on the stage and asked the audience if they were interested in watching this masterpiece. The whole hall responded positively in one voice. After hearing this answer, the presenter surprised the audience and introduced them to the people who gave them this incredible film by pointing to the left. A team that worked on the film for a very long time appeared on the scene. The audience continued to clap their hands, congratulating the project team on the first show. Khan took the microphone in his hands and began to conduct a dialogue with his wards. He was infinitely grateful to actor Kim Myung-jin, who performed his role incredibly well. Kim Un-sung is in the audience and applauded the lead actor. He was absolutely not upset that the fame for this film did not go to him. On the contrary, it made the young man progress. Of course, he was jealous of Kim Myung-jin, but he kept repeating that he would be able to catch up with him. Clasping hands together, Kim Un-sung made a bet with himself that next time he would also stand on stage and receive applause like the main character of the film. After the speech and conversation with the main creators of the film, the event ended. People left the auditorium, continuing to discuss the masterpiece. Kai Man-song left with all the audience. He just walked forward thinking about his future as an actor, which looked as bright as possible for him. Suddenly, the young man heard two boys discussing the actors of this film. They were impressed by the acting skills that literally everyone displayed. Kim Un-sung did not hear anything new at first, as the boys admired the main character, the commander-in-chief, who, in their opinion, was the same in life. However, they suddenly started talking about another actor who impressed them. They didn't know their name, but it was just an unforgettable scene for them. Kim Un-sung carefully listened to the dialogue of the interlocutors and understood that it was about him. During his performance on stage, people really applauded. The young man was pleasantly surprised that he was already being talked about. People certainly didn't know him by name, but they obviously remembered his acting. Ki Man-song walked up to the elevator in high spirits and pressed the bottom button. The young man had to go down to the first floor to leave the cinema. The actor was waiting for the elevator and continued to think about his fame, which was quite enough for him so far. Suddenly, a familiar voice was heard behind him again. Ki Man-song couldn't understand what was going on. This day seemed very strange to him because some female voices constantly appeared behind him. Turning his head back, the young man saw a middle-aged woman. He did not understand how the woman knew him and asked who she was. The stranger apologized for distracting the actor and decided to explain her extra words. She just held out her business card, which had absolutely everything written on it. The name of the woman and her position were written on the business card. Director Yoon Seo-en held a high position in the MC Entertainment Company, which literally shocked the young man. He could not believe the words he saw on the business card with his own eyes. It was just an incredible coincidence that was hard to believe. Ki Man-song looked at the interlocutor with surprised eyes and asked why she came to him and had the honor of finding him herself. Yoon Seo-en smiled and asked the young man in a low, superior voice if he himself did not understand why the directors of the company visited the actors personally. The woman informed the young man that she wanted to call the actor to her. Ki Man-song almost fell off his feet at such news. MC Entertainment offered him cooperation. Ki Man-song took some time to think. The next day he went to the organization that offered him a contract. It was based in the city center. Looking at the high-rise building in front of him, the young man was speechless. He did not expect to see such a scale from MS Entertainment. The actor saw two large letters on the top of a high-rise building and realized that he had come to an address where a bright future awaited him. Having entered the building, the young man immediately began to study the surrounding interior. Suddenly, he met a man on his way who was walking down a wide corridor. Looking at his face, Ki Man-song was speechless again. This man was incredibly handsome, according to the young man. Ki Man-song eyed the man and guessed that he was a celebrity since they put a lot of emphasis on their looks. The second-rate actor suddenly began to doubt whether he would even be hired in this company if such handsome actors were everywhere. Ki Man-song remembered that the company director spoke to him quite pleasantly, so he ventured to assume that she could not have deceived him. The young man's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Yoon So herself in. She greeted the newcomer and was glad that he had made the right decision. Ki Man-song smiled back and, on the contrary, thanked the director for drawing attention to an unknown and completely unremarkable actor. The woman smiled and said that it was not true at all. She added that she is rarely wrong, so she always makes her bets carefully. After a short greeting, Yoon Seo-en immediately invited the young man to move to her office and discuss the terms of his future contract. The director of MC Entertainment explained the terms of the contract to the young actor in detail. Ki Man-song tried to listen carefully to the woman. Despite his attention, he understood almost nothing of her words. It was not surprising, because the young man first encountered a similar situation in his life. Ki Man-song hoped that the company director would help him with the contract and just smiled, agreeing to almost everything. After the story, Yoon Seo-en put the documents on the table and said that after the explanation, she could start writing the young man's contract with the company. Ki Man-song looked at the sheets of paper and was incredibly happy that he would finally become a real actor who would receive enough money to live on. Yoon Seo-en, without saying a word, began to fill in the gaps in the contract, where it was necessary to enter certain numbers and letters to the company representative. The director of MS Entertainment informed the young man that he was offered a contract with the best conditions in the industry, where everything is not so simple. The woman added that because of this, there were many conversations among people from above. The director asked if the young man understood what she meant. Ki Man-song did not understand anything at all. He looked at the director with a frightened and surprised look and asked if she could explain in more detail. Yoon Seo-en grinned back and explained that she was referring to the situation with the young actor with whom she had taken an incredible risk. Ki Man-song had already begun to catch the essence of this question. He carefully watched the director's lips and realized what responsibility the woman was taking on. Yoon Seo-en adjusted her glasses and asked the young man not to be afraid. She said she mostly trusts her eyes rather than the actors directly. The young man did not understand what exactly the woman was leaning towards, but he began to worry a little about his situation. He swallowed slowly in excitement. The director of the company continued and again drew the young man's attention, asking him to fulfill his contract no matter what drastic changes happened in his life. Of course, Man-sun promised the woman that he would work tirelessly. He may not have such an opportunity again in his life. After receiving a response from the actor, the director of the MS Entertainment Company suggested that he proceed to signing, and the young man immediately put his signature in several places. Yoon Seo-an drew the young actor's attention to the fact that he had left an empty space in a very important point, which he would definitely need in the future. After that, the director decided to demonstrate. She pointed with the index finger of her right hand to the empty place. The young man forgot to sign. Kim An-song read the adjacent words to this blank space and was simply shocked. He didn't know how to react because he had never filled one before. Yoon Seo-an asked the rookie what he would do if he missed the most important clause in the contract that literally feeds him. After these words, the director of the company took a pen and filled in the blank where it was necessary to write the salary that the young actor will receive. Seeing that the woman had written a figure of 5 million won, the young man almost dropped his eyes from his work. Such an amount seemed simply incredibly large to him. Yoon Seo-an smiled and said that Kim An-sung needs to take a closer look at her contract as she hasn't fully filled the gap yet. Kim An-sung cupped his face with his hand as the woman added a few more zeros. This was simply a colossal number that he had never encountered. The director said that their company is not poor enough to deprive the diamond that she found personally and wants to give him everything he needs. The young man took the contract in his hands when the woman finished drawing zeros. He began to count their number, doing it over the course of several seconds. Kim An-song counted 7 zeros and couldn't believe his eyes. He froze in one place, holding in front of him a contract for an incredible amount. His eyes widened with surprise and happiness, which he had been waiting for all his life, working at a car wash and getting pennies. Now huge bills flashed in his eyes which he had not received before. The young man's poor life ended, and a rich one began. The young actor quickly came to his senses and went to spend his first fee. He went into the store and came out with huge packages. Then the young man went to a clothing store. Here he chose the most expensive suit, which was worn by representatives of a very expensive store. Kim An-sun looked at himself in the mirror and did not recognize himself. He looked incredibly stylish and felt the suit fit well on his body. After shopping, the young man went to his apartment, deciding to rest a little. He couldn't stop thinking about the incredible amount in his contract. The actor went to the window and looked at the city, taking a deep breath. He never in his life knew how to live comfortably. Kim An-seong called his mother and told her that he had just sent a certain amount of money to the card for her to spend at her discretion. The mother was very scared for her son and thought that he had stolen the money. The young man reassured his mother and explained that he had finally become an actor and received his first fee. In the evening of the same day, the young man went to a bar to celebrate with his friends. Today he treated his friends at his own expense because he could afford it. Friends were incredibly happy for Kim An-sona. They knew how much he wanted to become an actor, and finally he managed to achieve his goal. The guys even started joking about the fact that the young man will now start kissing the most famous actresses, with whom he could only do it in his dreams. Despite all the jokes, the friends were genuinely happy for their friend. Now their company has one more millionaire. Kim An-sun behaved quite modestly at the table. He thanked his friends for the greetings and offered to finally talk about something else. The boy on the left declined as they had gathered to congratulate his friend on his success, so he immediately offered a drink for his achievement. The friends spent almost the whole night at the bar. The morning came almost imperceptibly for them because they slept only a few hours before the sun rose. Kim An-song was fast asleep in his apartment on the sofa, having forgotten to take off his clothes. His dirty socks lay on the floor, and the young man was snoring loudly. Suddenly, someone came to his apartment. Hearing the sound of the bell, the young actor immediately rose to his seat and headed towards the door to check. Opening the door, Kim An-song saw in front of him the same red-haired man he encountered during his first visit to MS Entertainment. Kim An-song was incredibly surprised to see this handsome man in front of him. He did not understand what a celebrity was doing at his house. The man greeted the young actor and, apologizing for his tactlessness, called him not punctual because 10 minutes had already passed since the appointed time. Kim An-song asked who came to see him anyway. The man, following the example of his director, simply held out a business card with everything written on it. The young actor took the piece of paper in his hands and saw that the MS manager had come to him entertainment, whose name was Moon Jong-bae. After reading the text on the business card, the young man looked up and remembered that the director reminded him that the manager would visit him this morning. Kim An-sun gathered himself very quickly, and together with the manager, they went to the restaurant, where they were to discuss important details of the cooperation. Moon Jong-bae immediately introduced himself as the young man's manager, who would accompany him on his creative journey and be responsible for the schedule. Kim An-sun was absolutely clueless in these matters, as he has repeatedly admitted. Scratching his head, He said he had full confidence in the manager. Moon Jong-bai changed the conversation there and said that he had heard a lot about the young man because there are rumors that he was invited to the company personally by director Yoon. The young actor felt very uncomfortable in this situation. He felt as if he had squeezed into a large company on the recommendation of an important aunt. Ki Man-sun looked at his manager with a smile and suggested that he address himself as you, as he is obviously older. Moon Jong-bae replied that they don't necessarily need to switch to an informal style of conversation, as he is comfortable communicating with you. The manager made the young man feel uncomfortable again. Ki Man-song shook his head and apologized for suggesting something unclear. Moon Jong-bae seemed not to pay attention to this and offered to get down to business right away. He handed the young man a sheet of paper describing his first film. The film, called The Follower of Darkness, was the second in the arsenal of Ki Man-sona. He carefully began to study the details that were written on the paper. Moving your finger slightly to the right, Ki Man-sung saw his name, next to which was written the role of mechanic in this movie. The young man was very happy with his new role, but he did not understand what it meant. He turned to the manager and asked to tell him more about the role. Moon Jong-bae smiled back and said that this is what his job is all about. He explained that the mechanic in the film dies from stab wounds. Ki Man-sun was just shocked when he heard more details about his role. He by no means assumed that his first role in the company would bring him unbearable emotions. The manager added that the young man will be the actor who will be stabbed more than a dozen times, after which he will die an incredibly horrible death. From the realization that you will have to endure pain again, Ki Man-song almost went mad. His body instantly shook. He closed his eyes for a second and imagined how he had to die again in the movie, feeling the emotions of real death. Seeing the picture of his death, Ki Man-song opened his frightened eyes and realized that he did not really want to participate in this performance. The young man could not stop his rapid breathing. He was very afraid because he did not want to feel such pain every time. He recalled moments from his past when he had to play the role of a prisoner. These emotions remained with him for the rest of his life and were in no hurry to disappear. On the back of the head of the young actor began to appear under, which slowly flowed down. The body continued to tremble, considering the tense situation. Ki Man-song lowered his tormented gaze downwards and began to think about giving up the role, as it was too dangerous for him. However, the young man also understood that he needed money. These two thoughts were fighting in his head and did not allow him to even continue the dialogue. Moon Jong-bae could see that the young man would behave quite strangely. He tried to bring him back to reality and continued to talk about the role. Clasping his hands together on the table, the manager added that the young man would have a role in which he would simply die a brutal death at the hands of a serial killer. The last words scared the young actor even more. He slowly opened his lips and whispered the words that had been spoken by the manager. Moon Jong-bae took the information about the next movie out of his charge's hands and folded the papers together, tapping them on the table. The manager smiled and informed the actor that his role will be very important, because in the final release, he will be able to shine in the film version. Despite the good news, Ki Man-sun was in no hurry to rejoice. He slowly extended his right hand to the table, which continued to tremble. There was a cup of tea on the table, which the young man picked up. Opening the lid, he asked the manager if he was sure that this role suited him. Moon Jong-bae asked his protege not to worry about this situation, as he had seen his skills in the previous film. The manager praised the young actor for his role in the movie 1593 Hungju Mountain Fortress, where he recalled the incredible scene with the slitting of the throat. The man forced the young man to recall this moment again. From this position, he was again thrown into the under. The body turned pale and looked like a real dead man. The manager added that the actor will soon see for himself that this role suits him. Ki Man-song asked if it would really be like that. The young man continued to hold in his hands a cup of tea in which the liquid splashed. The tea spilled from one wall to the other due to shaking hands. Ki Man-sung looked at the liquid in the glass and wondered if his acting career would end and he would give up his first role. He had an ironclad argument to do so. He could see before his eyes his previous minor roles where he had to experience various deaths. Suddenly, the manager interrupted the young man's thoughts and brought him back to reality, asking how he was so good at playing death in various episodes. Ki Man-sung hadn't fully come back to reality yet, so he apologized for his confusion and asked the manager to repeat the question. Moon Jong-bae once again reminded the young man about the movie Hungju Mountain Fortress and asked him where he got such incredible acting skills. Ki Man-song had nothing to say. He looked at the interlocutor with a bewildered and frightened look, trying to find the right words. In a few seconds, the young man could not find them. He simply looked away, showing that he wanted to avoid this answer. Moon Jong-bae continued to admire the young actor's performance, recalling the incredible moment with the beheading where the young man's eyes glowed like in real life. Kim Man-sun really wanted to tell the manager that it wasn't all a game, but he understood that no one would believe him, and his career could end there. Suddenly, the young man began to speak, but suddenly stopped. The manager didn't want to interrupt him, so he just watched and waited for the actor to continue his line. Fiddling with his fingers in excitement, Kim Man-sun asked the manager a slightly inappropriate question whether he had to fulfill this role. Moon Jong-bae was slightly confused by the question. It put him in a stupor. The man did not understand why the young man decided so abruptly to make a decision. Despite the tense situation, the manager smiled and assured the young man that he could refuse the role if, of course, he wanted to. Kim Man-song did not expect such an answer. He was surprised and asked his manager if his last words sounded like the truth. Moon Jong-bae asked the young man to take his time and reminded him that he signed a contract with an organization where refusing a role is considered a violation. Now the promising actor realized that everything is not so smooth for him. He looked at the manager in surprise and asked what it all meant. Moon Jong-bae threw up his hands and replied that his charge seemed to be reading his contract, where everything was written in black and white without attention. Kim Man-song was speechless at this moment. He really knew absolutely nothing about contracts and simply signed after talking with the director of the company. The manager took out his briefcase and began looking for papers in it, informing the young man that such situations sometimes happen to newcomers. He took out the ward contract he always carried with him from his briefcase. After that, he held it out on the table so that the actor could read everything with his own eyes. Moon Jong-bae pointed to the 3 paragraphs where the young man read that for the first 3 years, he must fulfill all the roles offered by the company. The manager once again reminded that the young man signed this contract, so the choice of roles in the coming years remains only with MC Entertainment. Kim Man-song was simply shocked by this turn of events. He looked at his contract with frightened eyes and didn't understand why he hadn't read it at all. Moon Jong-bae continued the dialogue on this topic and said that this is not all. He added that a fine is provided for terminating the contract with the company. The young actor definitely could not expect this. He was effectively enslaved for 3 years and could not even break his contract with his employer. The manager explained that Clause 7, Part 3 detailed that in the event of termination of the contract, the actor must pay the deposit amount as well as 10% of the total amount. After that, Moon Jong-bae confidently began stuffing the documents into the briefcase and assumed that the young man did not really want to take such risks. Kim Man-song really wasn't ready to pay such incredible fines. He opened his mouth wide in surprise, as if asking what he should do now. After this conversation, the manager said goodbye to his charge and gave him some time to think, asking him to make a decision as soon as possible. Kim Man-sun went to his apartment and sat down on the couch. He was kicking his feet in the air, trying to somehow calm down and distract himself. In front of the young man's eyes was the figure of his happy mother, who received good news from her son, as well as a huge amount in her bank account. Kim Man-sun spent his first fee as foolishly as possible. He went out with his friends in a bar where he left the lion's share of the sum. Now the young man had to think about how to get the money back again, since he did not want to participate in this unbearable role for him. The young actor looked at his new spacious apartment, which he also rented for a fee, and began to accept that he would have to have fun. Kim Man-song picked up the copy of the contract that he had. The 50 million won he was supposed to receive will now turn into a fine. The young man remembered the words of the director of the company, who assured him that everything would be fine, and even assured him that she had actually taken him as a surety. Then the face of the manager appeared in the young man's head, telling him about the termination of the contract and the return of the fee, along with the fine. Kim Man-song seriously thought about his future. Breaking the contract was not so easy, just like participating in the shooting of a new film. Suddenly, the young man quickly got up from his couch. Once again, he carefully considered all the pros and cons, choosing only one true path for himself. Kim Man-song reached into his pants pocket and took out his phone. He dialed the manager Moon, who copied from the business card. After that, the young man was going to call his mentor. His hands were not shaking at all, as the decision had actually been made earlier. The young actor held his breath and began to listen to the horns. Moon Jong-bae didn't pick up the phone for several seconds, which started to confuse the young man a little. Finally, the manager picked up the phone, and the actor asked if he had called the right number. Having received a positive response, he informed the man that he was ready to play the role of a mechanic. The next day, Keyman's son had already gone to the set where company representatives were waiting for him. It was a tall building in the center of the city. Entering inside, the young actor immediately saw a huge crowd of people in front of him. He couldn't understand why it was so noisy. Song was not sure that he had arrived at his destination. He took out his phone from his pocket and was going to check the geolocation. After looking at the maps, the young man was convinced that he had come to the right place, despite the fact that there was complete chaos around him. Sung still felt uneasy but tried to reassure himself that he wouldn't really die during the movie. The guy approached the office, the number of which was sent to him by email. He hesitantly raised his hand to the handle and was about to open it. Suddenly, he was stopped by a man who was moving inside the same door. He pushed the young man in the back with his powerful left shoulder. Sun immediately looked behind him and did not understand anything. He only felt that a man with a stocky build bumped into him. Looking at the man's face, Song recognized a man named An Jong-woo, who was chosen as the main character in the film Follower of Darkness. An Jong-woo was a relatively young actor, but the producers saw his talent as he was very good at any role. It was this man who was the hero who had to inflict 10 knife wounds on the mechanic, after which the hero, Sona, leaves the script for good. Song saw this man as a very unusual person. It seemed to him that he had come for his soul and was urging him to a quick death. The young actor swallowed slowly. Drops of sweat appeared on his face to roll down. His excitement could be seen with the naked eye. Sun held his breath and, clenching his teeth, looked at his colleague in the workshop, who very unexpectedly appeared behind him. An Jong-woo stopped right at the front gate with the young actor. It bumped into his shoulder a bit because there wasn't enough room. Song felt uneasy at this moment. Looking at the actor's face, the young man looked down and felt a little embarrassed. An Jong-woo continued to look down on the newcomer. This caused him a sense of guilt and some shame. Seeing that the young actor looked down, An Jong-woo turned his head back and no longer paid attention to the young man. The lead actor walked in the door right in front of Man's son, who continued to stand in his place and looked after the famous actor. The newcomer wondered what had just happened. He felt a very tense atmosphere, as if An Jong-woo wanted to spoil his mood. All the actors and screenwriters were supposed to gather in the hall for the reading of the script that day. It was a necessary day to prepare for filming. On the tables in front of the actors were folders with scripts, which were signed with the title Follower of Darkness. So far, no one has been in a hurry to pick up the folders. Everyone sat in their seats in silence, not speaking to each other. In the center of the room, there were several tables arranged in a square. Screenwriter Kasu Jin has not been at the workplace yet. The actors could not begin rehearsal until all the important figures were here. Chief Director Yoo Jin-soo was also absent from the script reading room. Apart from him, several important actors have not yet arrived for the reading. Suddenly, the door to the room creaks open. Someone slowly took a few confident steps forward, crossing the threshold of the reading room. All those present suddenly turned their attention to the character who appeared in the room and continued to approach the square table with a leisurely step. He shuffled his feet as slowly and confidently as possible, paying absolutely no attention to anyone. The young man accepted himself as a real star. An Jong-woo, he was the only talk in the room right now. Song knew that this young man was a year younger than him, but he had debuted much earlier. Some of those present in the room saw the young actor with their own eyes for the first time. They admired his previous roles and looked down on the young man. A little more experienced actors were already familiar with An Jong-woo. They immediately greeted the talented young man, waving his hand and smiling. An Jong-woo only bowed in return. He behaved like a real star of the new generation, who has incredible acting skills and looks. Song understood that all the viewers will be eagerly waiting for the new role of the experienced actor, because this time he got an unusual role. An Jong-woo did not choose roles of his own free will. He took on absolutely any role, regardless of the background or sequel. Finally, all the actors gathered around the square table, and all that was missing was the authorized persons who would manage this entire performance. Song sat comfortably in his seat and looked at the main character. He realized that he was again lucky to act in a film with an incredible actor. The young man was a little upset because he also wanted to be like the main characters and very soon get a role that no viewer will be able to forget. Song knew very well that to do this he had to go a certain way and first focus on the scenario that was right in front of him. Those present suddenly turned their attention to the newcomer. They discussed his performance in the movie Henju Mountain Fortress, which they liked incredibly. Man's son was relatively not young compared to the current protagonist, but those present recognized that popularity in this field can come even after 60. Those present were most impressed by the moment with the beheading in the film The Mountain Fortress of Henju. They admitted that at that moment they felt goosebumps. Also, people heard about the on-set improvisation that Key demonstrated Man-Sun. They were interested to know what will happen in this movie. While he was being discussed, Key Man-song sat still in his seat and went through the script, carefully studying every detail of his character. Next to him was the chair of an actor named Kim Jong-woo. He abruptly got up from his seat and decided to move a little closer to the young man. Kai Man-song completely ignored the extraneous noise. He continued reading the script and did not notice how the man approached him. Suddenly, the young man heard his name being addressed. He immediately distracted himself from his work and looked up to greet the actor. When he did that, he was literally speechless. He froze in one place and silently looked at the man standing directly above him. Kim Chang-woo realized that he had confused the talented young man a little. The man decided to sit down and smiled amiably to diffuse the situation a little. This man was an actor with incredible experience, whose filmography was simply endless. He even starred in 3 films, the number of views of which exceeded 10 million. Ki Man-sung, snapping back to reality, assumed he was doing something wrong. The experienced actor calmed down the newcomer and asked him not to get up. Kim Chang-woo reached out and decided to meet the young man. Ki Man-sung was simply shocked by this turn of events. His right hand trembled slightly. The actors shook hands. The first to introduce himself was Kim Chang-woo, who spoke about himself quite modestly, followed by Ki Man-sun. The young man had absolutely no idea what to say about himself. He did not want to do this at all, because he thought that it would be inappropriate to introduce himself to such a famous actor. The main character, An Jong-woo, sat at the table opposite and constantly looked at the audience, shifting his displeased gaze from one actor to another. Ki Man-sung looked at the young man with an interested look, as he was looking forward to his role as a serial killer, which would be completely new for the actor. An Jong-woo, judging by his appearance, was not at all worried about today or the filming process, where he will try himself in a completely different school. Suddenly, the dialogues between the actors were interrupted by a loud shout, who apologized for being late, immediately starting to justify a meeting with an investment company. Chief director Yoo Jin-soo and screenwriter Kang Soo-jin entered the room. They offered to skip all the formalities and immediately go to the most important thing. This was done out of necessity, as too much time was lost. The director slowly began to sink into the chair and discuss the script in parallel. Yoo Jin-soo dared to assume that the actors had already studied the script in detail, so he suggested that they immediately proceed to the rehearsal of the second page. Opening it, the man began to read the development of events, which took place in the dark of the day when a middle-aged man was returning home along a completely deserted street. The lead director revealed that this scene will feature lead actor An Jong-woo, and the victim will be Mr. Jang Daok-hyung. An Jong-woo had absolutely no reaction to these words. He silently turned his head slightly to the right, glancing at his colleague. On the right sat an actor named Jang Dok-hyun, who was supposed to play a man in a certain alley. The actors immediately agreed through a look. Jang Daok-hyun started faking a phone conversation with his wife on his way home. He laughed and asked about his son. Suddenly, somewhere within this dark street, a very strange voice was heard, an eerie, almost inaudible, bone-chilling and unpleasant voice. Jang Daok-hyun didn't understand what was going on. Suddenly, he realized that he had hit a passerby with his shoulder and immediately apologized for his imprudence. An Jong-woo began to rage at the stranger. Jang Daok-hyun immediately said goodbye to his wife and once again apologized to the stranger for his behavior. For An Jong-woo, he looked at the stranger with a sinister look, as if hinting that he was not going to forgive. Jang Daok-hyun asked the madman if he was over-dramatizing everything because right now he looked like he was going to beat someone to death. In addition, the man emphasized that they simply collided with their shoulders and no one was injured. An Jong-woo interrupted a new acquaintance. He shouted loudly and told the man to shut up. He said that the man's brains could only fall into place after he met his death. On this note, the director finished the rehearsal of this scene. He praised the lead actor for his skills, which, according to the director, have become even more perfect. Yoo Jin-soo continued to applaud the main character, while simultaneously suggesting that they go to the rehearsal of the next scene in order to make it to the end of the working day. The actors immediately listened to the director's advice and started rehearsing, because they valued their time. The next was a scene without the participation of the main character. Played their roles quite well. The director periodically tried to prompt his wards, correcting their emotions. The actors had a dialogue almost continuously, repeating it several times. At the same time, the screenwriter corrected the script, coordinating it with the main director. After listening to one more scene, Yoo Jin-soo ordered to move on to the next one. Another actor came on stage, who had the role of a passive man. He entered into a dialogue with his wife, who, on the contrary, was very emotional. This couple, sooner or later, was bound to fall under the knife of a serial killer. All this time, Ki Man-song sat in his seat and watched the emotional dialogues of secondary actors with incredible admiration. Suddenly, the director ordered to end the scene and move on to the next one. Next, the scene was supposed to take place in a taxi where the Ki participated man-son. The young man was a little puzzled to hear this. He immediately looked up and said he was ready to start any second. Actually, Ki Man-song was completely unwilling to do this. His eyes began to panic around the room, looking at the faces of everyone present. The actors around looked directly at the young man, expecting an incredible acting performance from him. Ki Man-song knew that he could not disappoint these people. Those present did not understand at all why the young man suddenly locked up. They wanted to see the incredible skills of the young man, which he demonstrated in the previous film. The mountain fortress of Hongju really brought fame to the young actor, and now everyone was waiting for the young man, who was unknown before, to show a masterclass. Screenwriter Kang Soo-jin has also heard a lot about this actor's skills. With a smile on her face, she looked ahead, scratching her chin. An Jong-woo looked at the young actor with a rather skeptical look. He continued to act like a true celebrity, looking down on people. The main observer of this event was, of course, director Yoo Jin-soo. He fixed his gaze on the actor who had the perfect role to play. Ki Man's son became very concerned about his situation. He understood that his future in this film could depend on this game. Realizing this, the young man began to sweat much more. He slowly swallowed the saliva that had formed in the back of his throat and prevented him from uttering a word. Ki Man's son took the script in his hands and began to flip through the pages chaotically, not understanding what kind of car he was making. He just couldn't control himself. Finally, the young actor stopped at the right page and started reading the script. First, he asked the taxi driver to stop on the street. Suddenly, according to the script, the young man felt sick and was going to vomit. Ki Man's son covered his face with his hand, and the taxi driver immediately understood what was going to happen. The man immediately began to brake in order not to take the car to the dry cleaners. Ki Man-song looked at the script in surprise and flipped through the pages in confusion. Next, according to the script, there was a scene with a black plastic bag. After dispatching the taxi, the young man got out of the car and stopped near the package. Ki Man-song didn't know what it would look like, but he had no other choice. He had to play his part and started throwing up on the dark road. Those present were disappointed with the performance of an unknown actor. They expected much more from him, but Ki Man-song showed absolutely nothing. Some secondary actors assumed that the young man could simply behave like that when reading the script, and on the set, he would show himself 100. The main director also did not like what was happening. He looked at the young man and shook his head, muttering something thoughtfully. An Jong-woo was 100% sure that his main competition would fail in this movie. After the first failure, the main actor immediately rose to the top. Meanwhile, Ki Man-song continued to flip through the pages of the script in a panic. He tried to somehow distract attention from himself because he really didn't like being in the center of it. The young man asked himself questions, but nothing came out of it. While reading the script, he felt extremely insecure and could not show anything. Suddenly, someone's hand landed on the young man's shoulder. The young actor almost jumped from this touch. This scared the newcomer very much. Turning his head to the left, Ki Man-sung saw Kim Chang-woo in front of him, who guessed that the young man was getting too excited while reading the script. The experienced actor advised the newcomer to calm down and stop worrying. He advised to just relax and everything will happen of its own free will. Ki Man-song was pleasantly surprised that such a famous actor was cheering him on. He smiled and thanked the man for the very useful advice. Suddenly, the boy looked across and began to worry again. He saw that the main character was constantly looking at him with displeasure and contempt. An Jong-woo, with his ominous and penetrating gaze, seemed to have crawled into the young man's soul, turning everything there upside down and making him worry. Ki Man-sung looked back at the main actor with frightened eyes, not understanding what was happening. He wanted absolutely no conflict. An Jong-woo really is, because he keeps looking at him as if he wants to kill him in real life. The director was not going to dwell on this moment for long, because several more scenes had to be rehearsed, so Ki Man's son was lucky. The actors again began to play their roles, trying to please the director and screenwriter. Almost everyone coped with their roles perfectly. Even the mask actors who had the scripts read them without any excitement. Ki Man-song watched his colleagues with a sad look. The rehearsal continued throughout the day. All the actors were incredibly tired, and the work was finally finished. Everyone was sent home. Ki Man-sung came out of the high-rise building in absolutely no mood. He understood that today, he could not show himself and completely failed in front of the director. Despite this, his role remained with him, which could not but please the young man. Tomorrow, his dream job was waiting for him again. Suddenly, Ki Man-song heard a car pull up to him and a familiar voice came from there. The young man realized that his manager had come to support him. Moon Jong-bae greeted his charge and praised him for his work today. He offered to get in the car to go home. Ki Man-song was simply shocked by such an offer. He asked the man if he would drive him home every day. Moon Jong-bae replied that he should have taken him to work anyway, so he advised him not to hurry on foot the next day. Ki Man-sung, along with the other actors, had the opportunity to rest for a while before filming. They had a day and a half before the shooting day. The director and screenwriter naturally chose the darkest time of day to shoot many scenes. Everything was prepared to start filming. The first command sounded, and the shooting of the first scene began immediately. A serial killer met his victim who carelessly shoved him with the shoulder. The killer immediately rushed at the passerby, but did not kill him with the first blow. Actor Jung Dong-hyuk grabbed the main character's belt. Of course, this could not deter the killer for long. An Jong-woo easily broke free from this rapture and finished off his first victim in the film Follower of Darkness. Yoo Jin-soo was delighted with how the first scene played out. He clapped his hands to the actor, who played very well in this scene. Ki Man-sun also applauded the incredible talent of the actors. He enthusiastically watched the events that took place on the set. After this scene, Yoo Jin-soo offered to shoot one more off-script to save time and not go to another location early. Ki Man-song didn't understand what was going on. He always believed that scenes in films are shot sequentially, so as not to confuse editors and actors. The young man was even more shocked when the director approached him and ordered to prepare for filming. This put the young actor in an awkward position. Ki Man-song stood motionless and could not say a word. He wondered why the director decided to shoot this particular scene just now. Chang Woo suddenly approached the young man from behind. He explained to the newcomer that this scene was being filmed in order to reduce costs without changing locations. Kim Chang-woo also added that the script indicates a slightly different location, but if you change the camera angle, the viewer should not notice anything at all. Ki Man-song immediately began to worry because he understood that just now he would start receiving injuries that would lead to unknown consequences. The young man decided to flip through the script and make sure. On one of the pages, he read that the serial killer would hit him several times in the chest, neck, and face. After reading the script for the scene, Ki Man-song closed the folder. He began to wonder if the exact same thing would happen to him this time. Yoo Jin-soo approached the main character and explained the scenario to him once again, asking for exactly 13 hits, no less and no more. An Jong-woo took off his mask and showed his sinister acting smile. He replied to the director that everything would happen exactly according to their script. After that, the director turned his face to the secondary actor. He waved his hand at the young man as he was frozen in one place for some reason. When Ki Man-sung finally responded, Yoo Jin-soo asked him if he was ready to act out the scene. The young man did not answer anything for several seconds. Despite the fear, the young actor could not lose such an opportunity. He nodded his head in response to the director, agreeing to start filming. Yoo Jin-soo immediately gave the order to start filming, until suddenly there were some problems with the cameras, and the director began to get angry with his wards. There was not a very pleasant atmosphere around, and Ki Man-sun felt that if he did not play his role properly, the director would literally smear him on the wall. When the cameramen were finally able to set up their cameras, Yoo Jin-soo again gave the order to start shooting, and the cameras began to capture the film. There was a sudden dead silence on the set. The film crew started filming the scene in the same dark alley. The only thing heard on the site was the sound of an unknown man with dark hair moving down the street, as if trying to hide his identity. Ki Man-sun was still behind the scenes and could feel how he was smoothly blending into the interior. The moonlit sky and the dark city suited him perfectly. Suddenly, the young man felt his brain begin to produce completely different pictures again. The location around him began to change, and everything became blurred. Ki Man-sun found himself in a completely different, much more realistic world. It seemed very strange to him that everything was not the same as in the filming before that. This time the young man felt much worse. He didn't have that feeling at all, and his head was even starting to hurt from overwork and excitement. Ki Man-sun immediately began to survey the area around him. Raising his head up, he saw an old building in front of him over which no less old wires stretched. He was near some booth that stood on a small hill. Around her was a single pillar, on which only one light bulb was shining. Ki-man-sun was just not far from this light. He suddenly felt some strange sounds behind him, which scared the actor very much. He began to run rapidly forward, fleeing from danger. Ki-man-sung could not continue running for long and was tired, so he decided to rest for a while. For a few seconds, absolutely nothing was heard, but suddenly danger was heard again. Ki-man-sung threw a frightened look behind him and began to run. He was kicking as fast as he could imagine. During his entire life, he did not notice such frightening emotions behind him. Ki-man-sung continued to move forward without stopping for a single step. He understood that if he stopped, the serial killer would finish him off immediately. Suddenly, a picture appeared in the hero's head. How a serial killer swings his knife and stabs directly in the chest, where pain is felt. Ki-man-sung could no longer continue running forward. He was incredibly tired and began to slow down so as not to fall on the floor from exhaustion. A picture appeared in his head again, on which you could see a huge pool of blood that had spread on the ground from a fatal stab wound. The young man did not understand what was happening. It was as if he was being tossed between different worlds and he could not control anything in any reality. Ki-man-sung, seeing the previous hallucinations, immediately decided to stop. He understood that it was dangerous, but there was no other choice. His body trembled with fear, and the young man wondered what he had just seen. It was very strange because before that, he had not noticed such a thing behind him. In reality, he had absolutely no control over his brain. His head constantly produced various pictures that were difficult to look at. Ki-man-sung grabbed his makitra, which started to hurt incredibly. He saw in front of him various memories that were completely unrelated to him. They were completely unfamiliar to the young man, which literally confused him and prevented him from even thinking normally. Suddenly a guess came to the young actor's head in which he was absolutely sure. His eyes widened in fright. Ki-man-sung dared to suggest that he saw before him the memories of his character, who experienced the moment of death every second of his existence. Ki-man-sung seemed to see in front of him a long photo film, on which various moments from the life of his character were recorded. The first shot on this film was a footlight that was lit continuously. It was the only source of light for the entire street. The young man walked forward and just passed this lantern. He walked quite confidently and slowly, not paying attention to anything. Ki's character Man-sona went after work. Before that, he drank some beer with his friends, and now he understood he went through some more. Suddenly, the young man heard some strange screams in the dark alley to his left. He simply could not ignore such a thing. Ki-man-sung stopped in place and began to listen carefully to the dialogue. The two men were talking to each other in a not very pleasant tone, smoothly switching to personal insults. The young man decided to check what was going on there. He took a few quiet steps forward and hid behind the wall from where he could calmly observe. He looked out from behind the giant wall, continuing his observation. In the alley near the garbage dump, two adults, at first glance men, really had a conflict. One of them was talking on the phone before that, and came across an inadequate man in a hood who said incomprehensible things and did not want to let the man go home. The character played by Jang Deok-hyun was very angry with the hooded stranger because he pushed him first, and now he dares to threaten him. The serial killer stood immovably in his place and calmly listened to his victim. He began to inspect the area so that there were no witnesses around. The view of the character played An Jong-woo stopped at a pole where there was no light bulb, although there were many wires on it. Suddenly, the killer heard some strange sound to his left and immediately looked there, deciding that someone was watching him after all. However, the husband's assumptions turned out to be wrong. Near the central street where one lantern was burning, he saw absolutely no witnesses. Ki-man-sung was able to escape the danger in time and hide behind the wall. He drew air into his lungs and held his breath so as not to make any sounds. When the men started talking again, the young man calmed down a little and started breathing again. He decided to see what would happen next. Hyun's character continued to express his displeasure with the current situation. In return, the killer was not going to be ceremonial with his target. He quickly drew a melee weapon from behind his back. An Jong-woo took a sharp knife in his right hand, intending to finish off the annoying man. Ki-man-sun was just shocked when he saw a knife in the hands of one of the men. He could not even imagine that this conflict would end in something terrible. The serial killer began walking slowly towards his target, knife in hand. He completely ignored the warning that the man was telling him. Jang Deok-hyun began to step back and calm the killer down. He wanted to make an agreement with a stranger because he understood that he could say goodbye to life. Despite all the man's pleas, An Jong-woo was not going to listen to him. He suddenly approached his body and delivered a precise blow with his weapon. Blood spilled on the wall and began to run down. Jang Deok-hyun was still alive after this blow, but his condition left much to be desired. The man stood still, trying to call for help. He was unable to do this because the vocal cords were completely severed. An Jong-woo was not going to hold a ceremony with his opponent. He told him to shut up and gave him another stab, finishing off his target. Jang Deok-hyun's character died a gruesome death in a dark alley. The serial killer said goodbye to the man to talk less, at least in the afterlife. After witnessing the murder with his own eyes, Ki Man-song clutched his face with his hand and was speechless. He was very frightened and did not know what to do. The young man thought it might be a dream and looked out from behind the wall to check everything with his own eyes. His worst dreams seemed to have become reality. Ki Man-sun immediately decided to leave the scene of the crime and report it to the police. With quiet and small steps, he tried to move away from this wall as far as possible. However, he failed to do this. In just a few steps, he made a lot of noise, which greatly frightened the young man himself. Ki Man-song did not look at his feet at all, where the empty bottle lay. He stepped on her and made enough noise to be heard. The hero perfectly understood that now he was in danger from a serial killer. His gaze and breathing stopped abruptly, expecting something terrible. An Jong-woo had a very good ear. Hearing a strange crunch at the very beginning of the dark alley, the man immediately cast his ominous gaze in the direction of the target. He gripped his knife in his right hand tighter and rushed in the direction of the young man who witnessed the murder so he could turn him in to the police. Ki Man-song was very scared when he saw the killer moving in his direction. He realized that he needed to get out of here as soon as possible. The young man did not know which side to choose to escape from the criminal. For 2 seconds, he spun in place, trying to choose the path where he should run. Remembering that his life hangs in the balance, Ki Man-song ran away without thinking, forgetting even where more people were. His character ran away from the killer in a matter of minutes. He was incredibly tired and stopped by the lantern to rest a little. The young man could hardly catch his breath. His breathing was as unstable as possible and did not allow him to rest because danger was literally at arm's length. Ki Man-song had just seen the flashbacks of his character, who had witnessed a murder and was now forced to flee to avoid ending up in the afterlife himself. The young man suddenly returned to his reality and opened his eyes wide. He was simply shocked and did not understand how this could happen. Ki Man-song did not understand where he was at all. He assumed that he could return to normal life and began to shake his head in different directions. The young man wondered what happened last in this reality. When he saw the pillar, he realized that he was still in his character's body. Suddenly, the young man felt someone running behind him. He froze in one place so as not to reveal his location to the enemy. Ki Man-song cast his frightened gaze behind him to confirm his worst guesses that he could see in his imagination before this. Turning his head back, the young man saw in front of him a huge shadow of a man who stopped and began to walk slowly towards the turn where his victim was. Just from one thought of his death, the character began to shake incredibly. More than anything in the world, he wanted to live, so he had to make quick decisions. The legs, which were incredibly tired after a long chase, suddenly threw back the bag and rushed from the place to save the life of their master. Ki Man-song started running forward again without looking back. He understood that one mistake or slow speed could cost him his life. The young man ran very fast in the direction of the night city, where the lanterns were burning, unlike the dark alleys that normal people avoided. Ki Man-song had no idea where he was going. He just wanted to hide from a serial killer who had been stalking him for a long time. The young man no longer had the strength to continue the chase. He was barely breathing after his run, but still kept walking forward. After walking a few meters, Ki Man-song completely surrendered and stopped, looking down. He didn't even notice how he was almost in the center of the city. Raising his frightened eyes upwards, the young man suddenly saw a light, which was very much compared to the place where he had just been. Ki Man-song just stared in front of him for a while and couldn't figure out where he was. He didn't care at all, if only to save himself. Suddenly, the hero's eyes opened wide in surprise. He realized that he was right in the middle of the city, where he was no longer in danger. He saw in front of him people who were absolutely calmly walking in the dark time of day. They talked to each other and she felt completely safe. Ki Man-sun watched various people. Some walked by with a cigarette in their teeth, some with a bag. The young man felt a strange feeling of not being distant. Looking up, he saw in front of him the sign of a local bathhouse, where he read that it was in a town called Theajon. Next, his gaze rested on a bright sign that attracted visitors who could learn acting skills or take courses in arithmetic. It was like a huge shopping mall. Nearby was a roller rink that worked even at night. The library on the left was closed. Instead, the nightclub's bright sign announced that the Yusan area is completely awake at night. Ki Man-sung was just shocked and couldn't understand how he ended up in Daejeon in the first place. His memories became more and more confused. A teenage girl carrying a backpack passed by the young man. It seemed very strange to him that the girl decided to go for a walk at such a late hour of the day. Kim An-song stopped the girl and immediately apologized. He asked permission to ask a question. The girl immediately moved away but stopped. The young man asked a passerby what year it was. The girl only chewed gum in response, and Kai Man-song decided to ask again. He rephrased his question and wanted to know what time it was. The girl answered again as indistinctly as possible because of the chewing gum in her mouth. Kim En-song decided not to ask any more questions and let the schoolgirl go. The girl walked on, leaving behind only a wrapper from under the chewing gum. Suddenly, the young man found a phone in his pocket. He immediately reached into his back pocket and pulled out an old Motorola. The young man literally could not believe his eyes. Such phones have long been discontinued. Kim En-sun opened the lid and looked at the screen. There he saw the exact date of October 17, 1995 in front of him. It was 9:45 on the clock. Tuesday was slowly coming to its logical end. Kim En-song was just shocked to see such an old number. He by no means expected to find himself in 1995. The young man now, of his own free will, began to delve into his memories to understand what had caused his sudden leap into the recent past. The actor recalled how at the first meeting with his manager, he told him a script based on a real crime of the past. Kim En-song then couldn't understand what his manager was even talking about. He read the script but saw absolutely no interest in it. Moon Jong-bae explained that the film is based on the case of the 1995 murders that took place in the city of Daejeon and are still a mystery. Now the actor realized that he was at the scene of the event in 1995, where he witnessed the murder, and now he has to play the role of his character to the end. Kim En-sun was at a crossroads and didn't know what to do next. Strange city around and unfamiliar people. All he could see in front of him were obscure old signs that were quite familiar to him, but he didn't understand why. Suddenly, the character began to have an incredible headache. Kim En-song immediately realized that his character's memories had once again flooded his brain. He saw in front of him the happy face of an adult woman with a laughing child next to her. He had not seen these people before and did not understand who they were. Returning to his normal thoughts, Kim En-song assumed that he could see the faces of his family members, that is, his character, before his eyes. The young man still did not understand how memories were generated in his head, but now they at least began to work for him and help him in the new world. Coming to your senses a bit, Kim En-sun decided to continue on his way. He made a few uncertain movements and moved forward to meet them. The young man was completely alone in a huge unfamiliar city. He had only memories that could at least somehow help him orientate in space. Drawing on his character's memories, Kai Man-sun walked around the city. He stopped at a crosswalk and was finally given a green signal. The young man crossed the road and stopped near a high-rise building. He turned his head to the right and decided he needed to go inside. Kai Man-sung wasn't 100% sure if he should visit the flashback house because it might affect his character negatively. After weighing all the pros and cons, the young actor still decided to go to the house. He slowly approached the door from where the light fell on him. There were many apartments in the building, where people lived everywhere. Almost no one fell asleep early, as the light in the house told about at almost 10 o'clock. Kai Man-song entered the entrance as uncertain as possible and looked around. He began to slowly climb the stairs, exploring the interior. He stepped very slowly with his feet on the stone steps that led to the mountain. Kim En-song didn't know where exactly he needed to go. As soon as the young man entered the entrance, the light automatically turned off on the first floor. Next, he needed to find his apartment. Kim En-song knew from his character's memories that he lived on the second floor. He climbed onto it and paused to think for a moment. The young man was standing right in front of the door of his apartment and did not know what to do next. He stared at the door in silence and did not move at all. After standing like that for a few seconds, Kai Man-sun nevertheless dared to take some action. He began to slowly raise his right hand up. The young man suddenly stopped and clenched his hand into a fist. He was not ready to meet people who, according to his memories, were family for the character. In the end, the young actor gathered his strength and raised his hand to press the call button, but still did it with the utmost uncertainty. He rested his index finger on the button and lightly pressed it. After that, loud and funny bell sounds were heard inside the apartment. A female voice in the apartment asked the guest to wait a little. In a few seconds, the hostess was already at the door and opened the door to welcome the guests. It was the character's wife, who was incredibly happy to see her husband, who came home from work tired and probably hungry. Kai Man-song felt some strange emotions inside. Seeing the woman, he immediately took a few steps back as if wary of her. Hearing his mother's voice, the son also ran out of the apartment. He was very happy to see his father, since he had not seen him all day. The little one rushed into the arms of his dad, hugging his leg. He was overjoyed when Dad was around. Kim On-song was simply shocked by this turn of events. He did not expect that he would have to play his character also as a father. A mother scolded her little son for running out of the apartment barefoot again. After that, she invited her husband to the apartment so that he could finally have dinner. The young man stood in his place and could not say a word. Various memories related to a happy family life continued to spin in his head. The son also invited his father to the apartment and wanted to take a promise from him to go to the shopping center tomorrow, where he has been promised for a long time. Keyman's son looked at the little one in front of him with sad eyes. He felt absolutely no empathy, but on the contrary, some anxiety and disgust. The wife wondered why her husband came in so gloomy today. She immediately assumed that something terrible had happened to him today. Keyman-song couldn't find any words to answer. He just looked down and said just one word before leaving. "I'm sorry." After apologizing to his wife and son, the man turned and went down the stairs. The woman tried to talk to her lover. Despite the requests and cries of his wife, Keyman-song left the high-rise building and went to the parking lot where he could breathe in the fresh air. The young man began to slow his pace after he found himself on the street. He did not understand at all whether he had done the right thing when he came here. Keyman-song stopped completely and was deep in thought. The glow of the lanterns brightly illuminated his figure, standing next to an expensive car. The young actor bent down and lowered his head. He did not know what he should do now and where to go in order to get out of these bad 90s. Keyman-song went to the nearest children's park where there were lights. He sat down on the children's swing and slowly rocked. Women thought about the difference in their roles. Currently, he was not at all ready to live with a completely unknown woman and a child. Keyman-song took a little more time to think. This role seemed much more difficult than the young man got in the movie Hungjun Mountain Fortress. The young actor once again scrolled through the words of the manager who told him about the film based on the serial murders in the city of Daejeon. Keyman-song perfectly understood, based on the scenario, that sooner or later he would become a victim of an incident directly related to a serial killer. The young man began to mentally prepare himself for the fact that he would have to face difficulties. He wanted the horror in his head to end as soon as possible. Keyman-song cupped his face in his hands and once again asked himself what he could do to play the part and stay alive. The young man spent the whole night on a children's swing in the park. The morning of the next day has already come. The sun slowly showed its bright rays from behind the horizon. Keyman-song, despite his exhaustion, had been on his feet since the morning. He was walking towards an important place from his memories. The young man arrived at his character's place of work. He worked for a company called Electronics, whose headquarters were based in a high-rise in the city center. Keyman-song began to walk from side to side in front of the central entrance. He crossed over here for his memories, intending to go inside. Looking up, the young man wondered what he would do when he got there. He needed to move in a completely different direction. Keyman-song suddenly decided that he was not doing what he needed to do at the moment. He left his place of work and headed further. Relying on his memories, the young man was able to get to an internet cafe. To begin with, he wanted to learn as much as possible about the murder incident. Another guest came to the internet cafe. The employee immediately greeted the young man. Keyman-song was pleasantly surprised by the interior around him. He had seen such places only in old photographs. The young man slowly approached the free computer and decided to use the cafe's services. He saw in front of him a very old computer called Jindo 1. Keyman-song realized that he would not be able to find much information on this calculator. After all, here he could read news and articles that might help him learn at least something about the murder he had witnessed. After flipping through several strips of articles, Keyman-song found absolutely nothing about yesterday's murder, not even memories and other articles. The fact that no publication of this terrible event was made in half a day seemed very strange to the young man. Now it was necessary to search in a different way. Keyman-song decided to use the search by date. He was sure the incident happened on October 17th, so he started checking every year. Absolutely no search gave useful information to the young actor. He leaned back in his chair and despaired that he could at least find something. Keyman-song was not used to giving up halfway. Despite his failure in the internet cafe, the young man decided to take a rather risky step in his investigation. He personally went to the crime scene where the murder was committed. Thanks to his memories, the young actor could build a path for himself. Strolling the streets of the night city, Keyman-song wondered how he even remembered the road. He even noticed that each pillar was deeply embedded in his memory. Despite this, Keyman-song began to get confused in his memories, as it was already dark outside and the appearance of the alleys had changed somewhat. Continuously walking forward to the scene of the crime, the young man suddenly stopped. Now he plunged into his memories and assumptions about mental disorder. Kai Man Song rejected the hospital option and leaned more and more towards otherworldly forces. He suggested that his death here could lead to death in real life. With this terrible and unpleasant thought, the young man continued to walk forward. He needed to find out at any cost what caused these crimes. Ki Man Song, using his memories, finally arrived at the scene of the crime. He stopped in front of the tape that marked the scene of yesterday's murder. On the wall where a man was killed yesterday, his figure was outlined in chalk. The police tried to get hold of any details to investigate the criminal's handwriting. A yellow tape was wrapped around the 10-meter zone. The police did not think that anyone would come here, so they limited themselves to simple precautions. Kai Man Song stood in front of the yellow tape and thought he might die for real at any moment, but that didn't stop him on his way here. The young man took an uncertain step forward and reached out to pick up the tape and walk into the crime scene, until suddenly his body shook violently. He heard someone's suspicious steps behind him and immediately turned back. He looked behind him with his frightened eyes. Kai Man Song could see a man in a black suit wearing a hood in front of him. He walked slowly and confidently towards him without stopping. After carefully looking at this man's face, Ki Man Song could make out a mask and murderous eyes that could only belong to one person. From this turn of events, the young man almost peed in his pants. He was almost 100% sure that the serial killer An Jong-woo was coming to meet him. Ki Man Song slowly swallowed in fear. Seeing the serial killer's face, sweat quickly began to run down his face. The young man remained standing in his place. The killer slowly approached his figure, but did not stop, but continued to move on. Ki Man Song held his breath at this moment. He tried not to do anything at all, so as not to attract the attention of the unknown man. When the killer passed by him, the young man was very surprised. He wondered if the man really didn't recognize his face. Ki Man Song decided that he was safe. The young man turned his face behind his back to confirm his guesses. He immediately realized that it would be better not to do this. Turning his head back, the young actor saw the killer in front of him, looking at him with a menacing gaze. Ki Man Sung immediately began to babble. He perfectly understood his situation and did not want the death that was written for him according to the script. Approaching even closer, the killer asked his victim if he knew him. Ki Man Song looked at the man with frightened eyes and remained silent. After a few seconds, he replied that he knew absolutely no one, and took a few steps forward, trying to avoid death. An Jong-woo narrowed his eyes slightly, showing his victims doubting his words. The killer was not going to let the victim go so easily. Ki Man Song kept looking into the eyes of his potential opponent. He understood that at any moment he could find himself at the knife of a serial killer. The young man's guesses turned out to be correct, and the man sharply pulled out a knife from his back. He displayed a cold weapon in front of him, threatening the young man. Kai Man Sun was not even going to resist. He was just wondering if he was really going to die such a stupid death in this movie. Literally in a second, the young man received an answer to his question. The knife went straight into his stomach. The killer began to cut the internal organs. Ki Man Sun leaned his body on the killer's shoulder and endured unbearable blows with a knife, which pierced his skin every time and reached the blood. The young man could not do anything at all in this situation. He felt real pain. 13 stabs hit the target. At one point, the young actor began to drop to his knees and put his hand on the killer's shoulder, begging him to stop the unbearable torture. It was too late to save life. Ki Man Sung completely helplessly bent his head down and began to slowly sink to the floor. Blood flowed literally like a river from his body, which could not be stopped. With his last strength, the young man tried to ask for help, but there was absolutely no one around. The last thing he saw in front of him was a pool of his own blood that wasn't going to stop. He slowly began to lose consciousness and die. An Jong-woo finished his case and removed the witness who saw him not for the first time. In the dark alley, no one found out about the murder at night. Kai Man Sun suddenly saw a bright flash right in front of his face and a notification from the director that the scene had been shot. The young man did not understand what was happening. He began to slowly open his eyes, but the picture was blurry and he could not see anything. Shaking his head in different directions, Kai Man Sun saw in front of him a group of people who were stationed nearby and were holding some tools in their hands. The young actor still continued to play a role in the film. He leaned on the serial killer's shoulder and begged him not to finish the case. The film crew did not understand what was happening. Despite the director's order, the young actor continued to play and absolutely did not notice anyone around. An Jong-woo was as shocked as the film crew. He took off his mask and looked in surprise at the young man who continued to play his role. Kai Man Song looked up and saw a young famous actor in front of him. Now he understood that the horror in the real movie was over. The young man fell to the floor and began to feel his wounds on his body. At that moment, one of the crew members approached him and asked him to finish. Ki Man Song continued to feel the wounds on his body. Not noticing absolutely no deviations, the young man was finally able to conclude that he was alive. The young actor sat on a chair and lowered his head, lost in his thoughts. He still felt as if he was being stabbed with a knife. Ki Man Song looked at his hand, which was shaking with terror, and told himself that he should have given up the role of being killed from the start. However, now there was no choice. The young man needed to continue his work, despite the wounds that were not actually on his body. Kai Man Sung suddenly wondered how the Daejeon serial killing case ended. He wanted to know as much information as possible about these murders. The young man took out his phone from his pocket. He was incredibly glad that he now had a smartphone in his pocket and not an old Motorola. Ki Man Sung opened a search in the browser and wrote a query about the serial murder case in Daejeon City so as not to ask the directors again. The young man managed to find out that despite all the efforts of the police and other law enforcement agencies, the serial killer from Daejeon is still at large. While the young actor sat in complete shock and tried to digest the information, the same member of the film crew interrupted him by calling his name. Ki Man Sung raised his head and looked at the man. Members of the film crew informed the actor that the director offered to shoot another take. The director carefully watched the events on his monitor together with his wards. He studied every detail to understand what needed to be improved. Now the man had a scene from a movie on the screen, where the killer holds his victim by the neck and does not allow him to move. The director carefully looked at this picture and tried to understand what was missing. He was missing something, and the man was trying to understand what exactly. After thinking for a few seconds, Yoo Jin-soo said that the actors acted very well, but the situation itself seemed very boring to him. The assistant director stood next to the man and countered that he thought everything turned out perfectly and that nothing needed to be changed. Yoo Jin-soo did not listen to his assistant's opinion and told the crew and actors to prepare to reshoot the scene. The director could not explain his opinion in any way and constantly looked around, looking at the location where the events of this scene took place. The film crew immediately took their places after the chief director's order. The night city was completely ready to reshoot the scene. Ki Man Song was just shocked to hear the director's words. He was very surprised that he would have to relive his murder. The assistant director replied that Yoo Jin-soo found the situation boring, so the actor would have to add some believability and emotion during the performance. Kai Man Song could not object to these words. He lowered his hopeless gaze to the floor and prepared for the fact that he would have to die again. When the shooting of the scene began, the young actor was again transferred to his parallel world. The picture before his eyes suddenly changed again. He saw the same night city in front of him. It was very different from the filming location because it transported him to the past of the city of Daejeon. Kai Man Song was standing near the crime scene, where he had just arrived. Now he already knew what would be waiting for him and clenched his fist tightly. Turning his head back, the young man saw a serial killer slowly approaching him. The heart again fled in the heels. Ki Man Song slowly swallowed and began to think about the face behind the mask. He wanted to know who it really was. An Jong-woo continued to walk leisurely towards his victim. The young man stood undisturbed and waited for the main scene to begin. Ki Man Song behaved much more confidently this time. He looked into the face of a serial killer and wanted to see who he really was. An Jong-woo slowly approached the protagonist of this scene and stopped. For several seconds, he just stood still, looking ahead. The serial killer showed his ominous eyes and suggested that the young man had not seen him for the first time, and that is why he had arrived at the scene of the crime. Despite the fact that Kai Man Song knew all the events by heart, but he still worried a lot. The young man lacked courage. Kai Man Song was just about to remove the mask from the killer's face, but suddenly he felt his body move on its own and move back. The young man stared at the man's ominous mask and wondered if he would manage to remove it before the knife touched his body. While the young actor was hesitating whether to try to remove his mask, An Jong-woo sprung into action and plunged his knife into the victim's body. Ki Man Song was simply shocked by this turn of events. The body refused to listen to him again, and now he was forced to endure excruciating pain. An Jong-woo took the first stab on the nose and thanked the young man for helping him reduce the time he needed to find her victim. Ki Man Sun took a few steps back and turned his back to the killer. He decided to run away in order to be able to proceed with his previous plans. The serial killer certainly did not agree to let the young man go. He immediately began chasing his victim, holding a knife in his right hand. The young actor ran as fast as he could. He periodically looked back and felt that the killer was very close to him. An Jong-woo, considering his victim's injuries, caught up with her very quickly. He stretched out his hand and was ready to grab the young man by the stone. Kim Man-song suddenly felt a touch on his neck. The killer quickly caught up with him and grabbed him by the collar, pulling his body towards him. An Jong-woo delivered another sharp stab. The young man's blood spilled onto the floor after his skin and organs were damaged. The serial killer continued to abuse his victim by stabbing him. Kim Man-song once again felt unbearable emotions before death. The young man shouted loudly, but there was no one around to help him. The killer could do absolutely anything he wanted with his victim. After a few seconds, the young man fell to his knees helplessly with tears in his eyes. He begged the man to stop abusing his innocent body. However, the killer did not care about the emotions of the victim. He completed his work and got rid of the witness, leaving his body in a dark alley. An announcement from the director about the end of shooting sounded on the set. Kim Man-song, at this moment, was lying on the cold ground. The young man pressed his face to the floor and did not move at all. He began to slowly regain consciousness and realized that life had returned again. At this point, Kim Man-song turned to himself and called himself a rag who can do absolutely nothing within a hair's breadth of death. The young actor began to slowly rise to his feet. His face was still dripping with sweat from filming. The young man chastised himself for not even trying to remove the mask and find out the true face of the serial killer. The main director, together with the assistant, carefully watched the shooting. After it ended, they began to think again about certain changes. Yoo Jin-soo slowly exhaled and praised the young man for his acting skills again, but the director still didn't like the situation. Kim Man-song didn't understand what was going on. He again played his death perfectly, but the director did not want to take the scene into consideration. Yoo Jin-soo explained to the young man that he was dying for the second time as weakly as possible. The man advised the actor to fight for his life with all the strength he had left. Kim Man-song listened intently to the head director with his mouth wide open. He tried to answer something, but could not find the right words. Yoo Jin-soo added that he has in mind the image of a decent family man who has to fight not only for his own life, but also for his wife and children. Kim Man-sung began to understand what the director was driving at. He wanted the murderer against the background of a decent family man to seem very cruel to the viewer. The young actor replied that he understood his boss. Moreover, Kim Man-sung himself said that he was willing to try the scene again. The actor again found himself in a parallel reality, where he saw before him the face of the killer. An Jong-woo called the young man a fearless person. Kim Man-sung played this scene in the third, but he couldn't get used to the stress. This time he promised himself that he would be able to pull himself together and take off the mask. Seeing that the victim was absolutely not going to resist, the serial killer took out a knife from behind his back and began to approach the young man. Kim Man-sung, remembering the words of the head director, put his hands in front of him and tried to stop the killer, distracting him with his words. And Jong-woo did not pay attention to the young man's words at all. He continued to step confidently and slowly forward, counting the seconds until the death of his victim. Kim Man-sung at one point asked the killer an unsure question as to why he continues to kill innocent people. An Jong-woo was just shocked to hear the question. His body shook from what the man heard with his own ears. The killer wondered how the young man had learned about his path in the first place. Kim Man-sung slowly swallowed and began to worry about his situation. An Jong-woo suggested his current victim was not seeing him for the first time. The man asked the young man who he was. Kim Man-sung took his time to answer his enemy's questions. He continued to backtrack slowly, trying to buy himself some time. At some point, the young man turned his back to the killer and began to run away quickly. He needed to save time and strength for his mission. Of course, the serial killer immediately started stalking his victim. He did not let go of the young man for a single step and was always at arm's length. Almost catching up with the young man, An Jong-woo made a sharp stab with a knife. But Kim Man-sung sensed the danger and managed to evade the attack in time. After that, the young man got even more scared and started running faster. He understood that the killer was very dangerous and would continue to try to kill him. Kim Man-sung decided to change the direction of his movement and turn left. After the blow, the killer stopped for a few seconds, which gave the victim an advantage. The young actor tried with all his might to break away from his enemy. His breathing was as unstable as possible, and it was difficult to even think. Despite being tired, Kim Man-sung continued to run forward. At the same time, he was thinking about how he should be further and where to run in general. Continuing to move forward, the young man suddenly saw a flash of light in front of him and realized that he was approaching one of the central streets of the city. Kim Man-sung was supposed to die according to the script, and he didn't know if it would even be advisable to run to the main street to escape danger, at least for this day. In the end, The young actor decided that he had nowhere to go. Almost running out into the central street, he shouted for help. Kaiman Song did not notice it himself as he stopped in one place. He quickly turned his head back to make sure the killer was gone. His worst guesses came true in a second. As soon as the young man turned his head 180 degrees, he immediately saw a powerful male fist in front of him. An Jong-woo couldn't let his victim escape. He delivered a powerful blow with his fist and knocked the young man off his feet. Kim An-song fell helplessly to the floor. The young man looked with frightened eyes at the man who was getting closer to him every second. He understood that this time he would have to die again. An Jong-woo was incredibly angry with his victim, which was evident in his eyes. He was breathing hard and wanted to finish the young man on the spot. This is exactly what he decided to do without thinking. The killer landed directly on his victim, squeezing his body and swinging a knife. He delivered a sharp and accurate blow to the young man's chest, pulling out a knife so that he was covered in blood. Kim An-song was once again unable to avoid danger. The young man looked at the sinister face of the killer hiding behind the mask and wondered if he would be lucky enough to find out his true identity again. Kim An-song raised his right hand with the last of his strength. He wanted at any cost to remove the mask and see the face of the real tyrant of the 90s. An Jong-woo wasn't just shocked by what was happening. Despite his mortal wounds, the young man still managed to reach for this mask. He removed it from the man's face and saw his features in front of him. In front of him was the real culprit of the events that were developing in Daejeon. After that, An Jong-woo finished his sacrifice and left the body. He took a step in another direction to hide from unnecessary eyes. Kim An-song began to slowly close his eyes. The last thing he saw was the killer approaching some hard rock and sticking his knife into it. After that, the eyes of the young actor completely closed. At that moment, he heard a notification from the director that the scene had been successfully shot. Kim An-song found himself lying on the ground after the murder. The film crew began to turn to him, praising him for his incredible acting. The young man came to his senses only a few seconds later and opened his eyes. He continued to hear enthusiastic exclamations about his acting skills from those around him. Kim An-sung breathed a sigh of relief when he realized he was on a movie set. He completed the filming of the scene and his main mission. That same evening, the young man went to his apartment and immediately fell on the bed. He was very tired and wanted to rest on his bed for a few hours. However, the case of serial murder in Daejeon did not give him peace. He constantly thought about the killer, whose mask he removed during the filming. Kim An-sung was still able to put aside his obsessive thoughts and close his eyes to get some sleep and conquer the world with new strength. A few minutes passed before the young actor again saw the face of the killer in front of him, which he managed to see during the filming of the scene. Also, before his eyes was a very strange picture with a knife, which the killer stuck in the wall before the end of this scene. Kim An-sung immediately woke up and began to shake his head. He tried to dispel the obsessive thoughts, but it was all in vain. The young man thought about the fact that the killer could remain at the scene until now. He didn't want to believe it, so he started checking the information on the internet. He managed to find almost nothing. The location of the serial murder case in Daejeon was classified and no one managed to get there. The next morning, Kim An-sung decided to check everything with his own eyes. He got on the bus and set off on the road to adventure. The young man was sitting on a bus that ran from Seoul to Daejeon. The path was not short, especially considering the young man's lack of time. The young actor sat on the right side of the bus and wondered why he was going to the place of events at all, if he had nothing to do. In less than an hour, the bus arrived at the complex terminal in Daejeon. It was the first building that welcomed all tourists in the old town. Kim An-sung got out of the red Hyundai bus and immediately looked around. At first glance, there was nothing special. When the young man walked through the streets of the city, he realized that it has become very modern compared to the 90s. He could compare the city with his memories. Kim An-sung didn't want to waste a moment, so he immediately went to the area where his character in the movie was killed. The young actor walked these streets and understood that this area has not changed at all. Since the mid-1990s, it was decided not to restore it in any way. Kim An-sung carefully examined every centimeter under his feet. Suddenly, he went behind one of the pillars, trusting his hero's memories from the past. Just on the floor in front of his feet, the young man saw a hole in a stone slab where a spark was glowing. This spoke of an incredibly successful find. Kim An-sung was just shocked that his character's memories actually turned out to be reality. He found what even the police couldn't find. A tourist in a city with a bad reputation decided to go to the main police department. A police car was parked next to the station, ready to leave. The police sergeant was a little surprised when an unexpected guest visited him. He asked the young man if he was another reporter. Kim Un-song asked the man to listen to him. The young man told about the details of the case, which was more than 20 years old, so almost everyone had forgotten about it. The sergeant asked his guest why bother with the case at all, which expires in 2 months and will be considered dismissed. Kim Un-sung asked the police officer to trust him and go to the scene first to demonstrate something very important. The police sergeant could not simply refuse the unknown. Scratching the back of his head, he exhaled unhappily and nevertheless agreed to an adventure from the young man. The men approached the police car, and the sergeant said he hoped the young man had come to the station not to play pranks. Kim Un-sun replied that everything was as serious as possible, and the sergeant left. They moved through the narrow streets of Daejeon as slowly as possible. The policeman perfectly knew the way to the place of events 20 years ago. He parked the car in the alley, and then the men left on foot. The sergeant looked around the area and recognized that absolutely nothing had changed here. Kim Un-song asked him to be patient and follow him. The young man arrived at the very pillar where he found the shiny object. He pointed to the ground where the old hole in the slab was. The sergeant did not believe the young man at first. He looked skeptically at the ground and could not understand why the young man was showing him all this. Taking a closer look, the policeman was literally speechless. It was an incredible find by a stranger that awakened an ancient cause. The sergeant immediately put on the disposable gloves he carried in his pocket. This was necessary in order not to leave unnecessary traces on the evidence. The policeman reached into the ravine and took out the knife with which the murder was committed 20 years ago. During this time, he had already managed to get rusty. Having put the iron evidence in a plastic bag, the sergeant sent the young man to the detectives, where he had to once again explain the course of his thoughts. Kim Un-song was sitting in a room with a man to whom he was constantly telling something. The police really took the old case seriously. The young man worked with a man who was engaged in writing photo robots. He described the murderer in detail from his imagination, and the police drew him on the screen. Two detectives stood in another room so as not to disturb the work. They could see on the screen the same thing that their colleague was drawing. One of the men started a conversation and was very surprised that the young man came to the police with evidence that he had a dream about the face of a serial killer. The colleague replied that there is no need to make hasty conclusions, as the young man is currently acting in a film related to this incident. The interlocutor agreed and asked how things were going with the rusty knife, on which there were drops of blood from the serial killer's once killed victims. A colleague said that there are almost no successes in this case, since 7 people died at the hands of the killer, and more than 20 years have passed since this murder. Another detective was in high spirits and said that the spirits seemed to have decided to help them. The detectives just laughed at this. The criminal photographer continued to ask the young man more and more questions. Kim Un-song nodded his head, confirming the facts. Eventually, the screen showed the clear face of the serial killer the young man had seen in his imagination, after he was able to remove the mask from his face. The detective, who was in another room, was simply shocked to see the face of the photo robot. He just couldn't believe his eyes at that moment. The colleague was very surprised by the reaction of his partner. He asked the man what was going on and why he was reacting so sharply. The detective turned to face his colleague and gave a loud shout, announcing that the man who was suspected in the first place was on the screen. The other detective was no less shocked now. He recalled that they let the suspect go because they had absolutely no evidence against him 20 years ago. Kim Un-song finished his work by describing the killer in minute detail. After that, he left the police station slowly. Meanwhile, the detectives summoned almost all the employees. They ran very quickly to the station, not paying attention to the unknown young man. Kim Un-song was shocked at how quickly the police responded. He stared in surprise as the men ran into the building. On this, the young actor's case was completed and he left everything to the police. However, he still had some additional business in the city. Kim Un-song went to the same crosswalk that he saw in his imagination during the filming. Now there was a light on the street and everything was visible. The young man approached the same high-rise building where his character's family lived. He remembered how he was more than 20 years ago. In modern times, the house has hardly changed. Only some windows in the apartments were released, and in general the picture was as similar as possible to the past. Kim Un-song pondered and began pacing from side to side. He asked himself why he came to this house based on his memories. The young man thought that his character's family may not have lived in this house for a long time, so it is better for him to leave this place and return home. As soon as the young actor was about to go to the bus stop, 2 people passed by him who did not notice the stranger because of their conversations. Kim Un-song was very surprised and turned his head back. He suddenly heard very familiar voices that stuck very deep in his imagination. Looking at the aged woman, he saw the wife of his character, who on the night of the tragedy last saw her husband, who left the family. The little boy who was the character's son has grown up a lot since then. He has become a real Lee Jin, who can now stand up for himself. Mother and son walked in the direction of their entrance, talking very emotionally. Kim-man's son decided to listen to what they were talking about. The son informed his mother that he had recently received a phone call from the police station and was told that a suspect had appeared in his father's case. The mother calmly exhaled and said that the police had already missed several times. She absolutely did not believe that the law enforcement agencies would be able to do anything. The son replied that this time the police really had ironclad evidence that this could turn out to be a serial killer who had 7 victims. The mother wished the police good luck because she wanted the criminal to be fully punished for what he had done to innocent people in their town. The son raised his eyes and looked at the sky, remembering his father. He said he would really like to brag to his dad about the police's achievements. Kim-man-song remained standing in his place and looked at the incomplete family. They went to their apartment where they continued to watch the crime unfold. After visiting the small town of Daejeon, the young actor decided to return to the capital immediately, as he did not want to stay overnight in a hotel. He arrived late at night at his home and immediately fell asleep. The morning of the next day came very quickly. The sun's rays did not allow the young man to sleep. Also, his phone was ringing. He informed the owner about the call several times in a row, but he did not pay attention. For the 4th time, Kim-man-song still woke up and opened his eyes. He exhaled unhappily as he wanted to doze off for at least a few more minutes. The young man saw a glowing red dot on the body of his phone. He realized that he needed to wake up and answer the phone. Taking his cell phone in his hands, Kim-man-song got up from the bed at the same time. His hair looked as messy as possible after yesterday's trip. The young man looked at the call application and saw 4 messages. They tried to call him several times, but everything was unsuccessful. Kim-man-song didn't understand who needed him at such an early hour of the day. He assumed that perhaps a personal manager was calling him. Having opened the phone number that called him, the young man did not recognize a single number. The actor was a little surprised and decided to call the stranger. When the phone was picked up on the 2nd line, the young man heard that he had reached the Yusan police station, where he had been literally yesterday. The sergeant reminded the witness that he had come to Daejeon yesterday. Kim-man-song asked the policeman what he was calling him about. The man replied that the police needed the personal data of the witness in this case. Kim-man-song was surprised and asked why. Looking at the monitor screen, the policeman replied that they are now in a very difficult position, which is getting worse by the minute. He explained that the police needed the necessary information about the witness who helped create the photo robot of the killer so that no further questions would arise. The sergeant advised the young man to turn on the TV and not to hang up the phone at the same time. The police were now under pressure from journalists and did not know what to do. Questions about the investigation of this case were heard literally from everywhere. Journalists wanted to find out who the person is who helped the investigation. Kim-man-song got up from his bed and headed to the living room. He did not understand why he should turn on the TV, but he agreed to do it. The young actor sat down on the couch and picked up the remote control. Turning on the TV, he did not understand why the policeman advised him to watch the broadcast. He saw in front of him only an advertisement for a token that was hung around the neck of cats in order for the owner to be able to recognize his pet among others. Suddenly, the ad was interrupted by breaking news. They were about a serial killer in the city of Daejeon who committed his crimes many years ago. Now the young actor understood why the policeman advised him to turn on the news. He was simply shocked to see what the journalists were able to dig up. An employee of the news marathon reported that the identity of the witness who provided information for the photo robot is being concealed by the police and is not being reported to anyone. After that, the woman contacted the reporter who was at the police station. The man said that the authorities are hiding the identity of the witness for his own safety. The reporter added that he was only able to find out that the witness has a specific connection to the film Follower of Darkness, which was filmed based on the incident. The woman was very surprised and asked if it was true. The reporter replied that the movie Follower of Darkness was indeed directed by Yoo Jin-soo. Kim-man-sung was simply shocked by what was happening on his screen. He sat motionless in his seat and felt like a complete fool. The young man asked himself if he had ever done things that could harm him personally or somehow affect the popularity of the film. After examining the faults, the young actor took a shower and quickly got ready for the road. He went to the 3rd subway station in the city of Seoul. He entered one of the carriages and sat down in a chair. He was constantly thinking about the incredible news that flooded literally every channel on television. Kim Man-sung picked up his phone and began to read the news about the long-awaited release of Dark Successor, which was directed by Yoo Jin-soo. The young man saw that thanks to the latest news, the film had gained incredible popularity. Tickets were sold out in a matter of minutes. People wanted to see this show. Kim Man-sung recalled that during his last conversation with the police officer, he asked the sergeant not to reveal his personal information so that another incident would not occur. The policeman laughed and told the young man not to worry. After this investigation, he was promoted, so he happily agreed to fulfill the young man's request. Kim Man-sung breathed a sigh of relief as he thought he hadn't caused any trouble. Everything ended quite well, and there was no reason to worry. The young actor found himself near the office of MS Entertainment in a few minutes. Today he decided to come by subway and not bother his manager. When the young man entered the building, he immediately met Moon Jong-bae and bowed to the manager. The man was standing by the front door and waiting for his ward. Moon Jong-bae asked the actor why he decided to come alone. Kim Man-sung replied that it would be more convenient for him to go to work by subway. The manager asked his ward if no one recognized him in public transport, and he drove as calmly as possible to the company's office. Kim Man-sung was a little surprised. With a smile on his face, he asked the manager who was supposed to recognize him in public transport. Moon Jong-bae reminded the young man that he was now a movie star, especially after the release of the latest film in which the young man played a key role. The manager also said that he received more than 7 offers for other roles. The young man got angry and said that he was not going to die anymore. Moon Jong-bae didn't understand what the matter was. He put his hand on the shoulder of his ward and said that his word remains the last. The manager reported that among the offers were not only roles with death. The man offered the young man a role in a romantic film. Moon Jong-bae changed the topic of conversation and reminded that the young man is now going to an interview, which will be his first, so he advised him to gather his strength. The men headed to the room where reporter Han Chae was sitting. The manager told the ward a little about this woman and her incredible fame. Moon Jong-bae mentioned several popular moments from the woman's past and also called her last name, which was known to almost everyone, the ghost of sensations. The manager also added that Han Chae-von herself insisted on a meeting with the young actor, who very quickly broke into the film industry. When he reached the door, Moon Jong-bae stopped talking and knocked. A woman's voice was heard from inside, which allowed to enter immediately. She was sitting at the table 1. In appearance, she was a very attractive woman with short-cropped hair, dressed in a classic suit. Moon Jong-bae gave a few more instructions to his charge before the interview as they made their way to the table. The journalist sat in place and waited for her guest. Seeing the young man in front of her, she immediately decided to compliment him and noted his incredible appearance, which seems even more beautiful in reality. The manager sat his ward opposite the reporter and informed the woman that this would be the young man's first interview, so he asked her to be a little more careful. Han Chae-von smiled back and said that everything will pass without any intrigues, and the young star will be satisfied after this interview. After hearing this answer, the manager calmly left his ward. He moved away from the table, and Kim Man-sung was left alone with the journalist. Han Chae-von immediately decided to relax the situation a little. She greeted her interview guest while smiling incredibly sincerely. Kim Man-sung acted very confused. He barely dared to open his mouth and say hello in return because he did not understand what was waiting for him. Han Chae-von immediately decided to get to the heart of the matter and asked if the young man knew that the movie Follower of Darkness had become popular thanks to him. Kim Man-sung absolutely did not expect to hear such a thing. He looked at the woman in surprise and asked why she thought he was the main star of the film. Han Jae-won reminded the young man that he helped find a criminal in Daejeon, which is why the movie is incredibly popular. The woman suggested naming it after the main star. The reporter suddenly and unobtrusively changed the topic of conversation. Her tone also changed. She wanted to discuss some questions related to the investigation. Han Jae-won looked at the young man with an inquisitive look and asked if the information about the killer he had dreamed about was the complete and undisputed truth. Kim Man-sung was very confused in this situation. He didn't know how to answer provocative questions at all, so he began to sweat profusely with excitement. Suddenly, their dialogue was interrupted by the footsteps of the manager. Moon Jong-bae decided to treat his ward and the reporter to fragrant coffee from the buffet. Han Jae-won thanked her husband for the coffee and suggested that the young actor leave this conversation for later, when they had a chance to discuss it. Moon Jong-bae didn't understand what was going on. He began to turn his head looking at the interlocutors, but did not receive any answer. The reporter took out a recorder from her bag and finally offered to proceed to the interview. She asked the young man how he came up with the dream of becoming an actor. Seeing that the young actor was incredibly worried, Han Javon said that she is a huge fan of the young man, so she will be completely on his side. She added that the young man's performance is very different from other actors. Kim Man-sung still couldn't relax, despite all the compliments from the reporter. Han Ji-won began the interview with the very beginning of the young man's journey. She tried to find out the necessary information as unobtrusively as possible. The reporter was a master of her craft. She was constantly smiling and did not show that she wanted to make an incredible sensation out of this interview. Kim Man-sung felt a little confused. He answered the question very uncertainly and did not understand why the journalist should know this at all. Han Jae-won saw the alarmed look on the young actor's face, but continued to pepper him with questions without stopping for a second. The reporter's time was limited to minutes, so it was necessary to have time for everything. She went so far as to ask about the incident in Daejeon. After 20 minutes, the interview came to its logical end. The reporter turned off her recorder, after which she thanked the young actor for his work. Han Jae-won rose from her seat and, waving to the young man, said goodbye to the boy until their next inevitable meeting. Kai Man-song said goodbye in return and followed the woman to the exit with a look. The reporter walked confidently towards the door with a satisfied smile on her face. As soon as the woman opened the door, she simultaneously took out her phone from her bag and went to the phone book to dial an important number. She told her boss on the phone that she had managed to speak with Kim Man-sun, and she assumes that he is the witness from Daejeon. For the journalist, it was a real sensation, and she still wanted to talk to the killer himself. In turn, Kai Man-song felt a little devastated. Seeing this, the manager approached him and put his hand on the young man's shoulder. Moon Jong-bae asked if it was difficult for the young actor in the first interview. Kim Man-song raised his eyes in confusion and looked at the manager. Stammering a little, he answered that it was really not easy to give an interview. After that, Moon Jong-bae informed the actor that he would now have to meet with the executive director and department head to decide on the next film. The manager apologized for not being able to go with the young man due to his own affairs and wished him luck. Kim Man-song understood everything and said goodbye to her husband. After that, the young man immediately went to a meeting with the top of the company. He went to the elevator and pressed the bottom button. The elevator began to descend. The young man was on one of the lowest floors, so he had to wait a very long time before the elevator came to him and took him up the mountain. Suddenly, Kim Man-song heard strange noises behind him. It was like the clatter of heels. The young man immediately turned back to check. He saw in front of him a beautiful woman dressed in a classic suit. She strode confidently forward, adjusting her sunglasses. The young actor was simply shocked to see Song Ha-na in front of him. Now he made sure that the woman is really an asset of the MS Entertainment Company. Song Ha-na stopped at the elevator when it was already on the third floor. Kim Man-song was extremely confused and didn't know what to do at all. He just stared at the woman until the elevator stopped on their floor. A signal sounded and the elevator doors began to slowly open. Song Ha-na immediately rushed inside from her seat. Kim Man-song, after observing the actress, admitted that she is really pretty and worthy of the fame attributed to her. Song Ha-na and Kim Man-sung faced each other in the small elevator. They had to go up on the same floor to the executive director. Having passed several floors, the famous actress took off her sunglasses. Now the young man could take a closer look at the features of the movie star's face. Song Ha-na abruptly and quickly placed the glasses in her bag that was carried under her arm. Just as sharply, she pulled the zipper and closed the deepest pocket. After that, the actress took out a magazine from her bag and started flipping through it. Kai Man-song glanced at the other corner of the elevator, watching the idol. Several minutes passed, and the elevator finally moved to the 10th floor. The actress and the young man lined up before exiting the elevator. When the door opened, the actors saw a woman in glasses in front of them, who seemed to be waiting for someone. She was standing right in front of the elevator door. Seeing Song Ha-na in front of her, the woman immediately put on a pleasant face and smiled, congratulating the famous actress on her early arrival. Song Ha-na revealed that her schedule was slightly pushed back, so she was able to arrive earlier. The actress asked if Executive Director Khan was there. The woman replied that the executive director simply could not miss the meeting with Song Ha-na. She added that the director is looking forward to the meeting. After this answer, the secretary looked at the young man standing behind the actress. Kai Man-song felt a little uncomfortable at this moment. The secretary decided to introduce an actor who recently became famous. She asked Song Ha-na if she knew actor Kim Man-sun. The actress simply remained silent, and the secretary explained that the young man played a second-rate role in the film Follower of Darkness, which became a real masterpiece in the world of the film industry. Song Hana looked down at the young man, then simply turned her back on him. She did not want to listen to news that was not related to her filmography. The famous actress went to the executive director's office. The secretary apologized for the force majeure and asked if the young actor could wait a little. The woman explained that Song Hana had arrived much earlier than the appointed time, but she needed to be accepted. Kim An-song agreed to wait a bit. The secretary went after the actress and informed the young man that the meeting would take place very soon, so she advised him to wait near the executive director's office. Kim An-song saw both women off with a smile on his face. He was influenced by memories of Song Hana's appearance, which was indeed incredibly beautiful. The young actor heeded the secretary's advice and decided to wait outside the executive director's office until he finished his meeting with Song Hana. Finally, the same moment came and the famous actress left the executive director's office, opening the door wide for herself to pass through. She was followed by executive director Khan with a secretary. They politely said goodbye to the actress, having previously agreed on something. Song Hana said goodbye to her husband and, turning her back, abruptly moved from her seat and headed for the elevator, tapping her heels. The executive director approached the young author and asked how long he had to wait. Kim An-sun immediately replied that he was only here for a few minutes. Han asked the young actor to understand the situation since Song Hana is their company's trump card. The executive director finally invited the young man to his office. Kim An-song followed the man and sat down in a comfortable chair. The executive director's office was very cozy. The MS Entertainment logo hung on the wall. Principal Han finally started a dialogue and expressed his gratitude to the young man who arrived as quickly as possible after receiving the invitation. Kim An-sun replied that he simply could not do otherwise. The executive director said that the actor's challenge was due to the fact that there were too many offers. Khan smiled and added that he wanted to meet the talented actor in person to review the scripts for the works that the screenwriters want to see him in. Kim An-song tried to act confident, but his sweaty face showed. He was visibly worried and did not know how to behave. As soon as the executive director mentioned the positions from the directors, his secretary immediately came out from the other end of the room, tapping instruments. She brought with her a whole stack of papers, which she placed on the table. The sound of their fall was resounding, indicating quite a lot of weight. After that, the woman spread the pieces of paper all over the table so that the executive director, together with the young man, could see all the proposals and compare them with each other. Khan began to talk about production companies and directors who want to work with the young man. It was they who sent all these roles and conditions to the contract. Having seen so many roles before him, Kim An-sun was speechless for a few seconds. He did not expect that such a queue would line up behind him. Suddenly, the young man saw a film in front of him, which was called A Reference to Murder. His body immediately began to tremble with memories of his previous roles. Kim An-song wasn't ready to play death again, so he switched to another movie. He had to choose something that would not cause harm. The next scenario that caught the young man's eyes was called The Devil's Smile. After looking through a few more papers, the young actor did not find anything unrelated to death. Looking at the scripts, Kim An-sun immediately understood what was waiting for him in these roles. The titles of the films spoke for themselves. There was no additional need to explain anything. Executive Director Khan was very surprised by the young man's reaction. He said that they personally chose the roles for these films based on the type of actor the young man was. Kim An-song didn't want to explain anything, but he still had to talk about the role with death that he no longer wanted to choose for himself. Listening to the actor's short monologue, the executive director and his secretary were simply shocked. They did not understand at all what the young actor was leading to now. Kim An-sung suddenly realized that this could put his acting future in doubt, so he wrung out and said that he would like to try himself in different genres. Executive Director Han thought about the young man's words. He said that unfortunately, there were very few offers from other genres. The secretary suddenly interrupted her boss and informed the young man that they have a very interesting film in which the actor will definitely want to try himself. The woman held out in front of her the script of a movie called Lovers on the River Seine. Kim An-sun definitely liked such an offer, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Han explained that it will not be a movie but a TV series, the screenplay of which was written by author Kim In-suk, who is known by her nickname, Ratings Machine. Kim An-sung listened in silence as the executive talked about the lead role in this movie that was reserved for Song Hana. In addition, the man added that the film features a supporting actress named Ko Ju-en, with whom the young man has already starred in the film The Mountain Fortress of Henju. Kim Man-song immediately remembered the friendly and pleasant girl Ko Ju-in. This was another factor to accept the offer from this director. After telling the young actor everything he needed to know, the executive looked at him quizzically and asked if he could handle the role. Kim Man-song did not rush to give a quick answer. He said that to begin with, he would like to familiarize himself with the script, with his role in particular. The executive director handed the script to the young man. Kim Man-song unfolded it in front of him and saw that he would play the male role of the second plan. The young actor was delighted that he would finally play the role of an ordinary boy who was adopted by a French family, and fate took him by itself. After reading the script for his next film, Kim Man-sung realized that he needed to go to English classes to better adapt to the role. He came to a French school called Bonjour. The young actor sat at the desk and listened to the teacher form French sentences. In response, Kim Man-song could only greet the man. He was forced to admit that the French language is very difficult. The young man remembered the words of the secretary, who advised him to work on French broadcasting, despite the fact that he is not a natural Frenchman in the film. The woman added that it is only necessary to learn to pronounce the words correctly according to the script, which will be quite enough for the role of the adopted son. Finally, the secretary added that the young man may not be accepted for his role, because if he does not succeed, they will easily be able to do dubbing. Kim Man-sung did not want his voice to sound different in the film. He wanted to master the French language as soon as possible in order to show himself on the set. The start of filming was a little more than a month away, and the young man worked hard to learn how to pronounce the French words that he would encounter in the script. For several days, the young actor studied French, but everything was unsuccessful. It was very difficult for him to pronounce because of an incredibly difficult accent. Kim Man-sung decided to distract himself and came to the drawing classes at the Alhambra School. He was standing right in front of the building and reading the sign. The actor knew that his character would be drawn in the film, so he wanted to at least learn how to hold the bone correctly, and the stuntman would still do the rest. Kim Man-sung went inside the building and greeted the teacher. He explained his situation to him and asked him to teach him basic drawing skills. The teacher immediately sat the young man on a chair and gave him a bone. Kim Man-sung heard many instructions from the teacher, but he could not put them into practice. The young man tried to write correctly, but his hand was constantly shaking in the air. Drawing on canvas turned out to be much more difficult than he imagined. Kim Man-sung was suddenly stopped by a man. He looked up to see a bespectacled man who introduced himself as his personal tutor for the next month. The days passed almost imperceptibly. The first 8 days of the month were generally unsuccessful for the young actor. He made no progress in his endeavors. Despite the setbacks, Kim Man-sung continued to attend French classes, where he repeated the same phrases each time. Also, the young man did not forget about drawing courses. He could not force his hand to listen to him. After all, he was much better at drawing. The shooting day came on the 31st. On the 30th of Kim, Sun was still not resting, but was on French language courses. He still couldn't say hello properly. In the morning of the next day, Moon Jong-bae picked up his protege by car to take him to the filming location. The actor looked very tired. The manager asked the young man why he was so disfigured. Kim Man-sung replied that today is the first day of filming and he can't learn French. Moon Jong-bae reassured the ward and said that he only needs to imitate the movements of his lips, since the head of the department has already found a doubler. Kim Man-sung asked the manager if everything would be okay, because he was acting in a TV series for the first time, for which he had not even been able to properly prepare. Moon Jong-bae continued to turn the wheel and reassure his ward. He said that the efforts of the young actor were quite enough for the role. Finally, they arrived, and the car stopped in front of large decorative houses. Moon Jong-bae said that this will be the place with him. The manager also added that the scenery was built specifically for the series. Kim Man-sung was literally speechless when he saw the scale of this series. The manager watched his charge with a pleasant smile. He saw how shocked and worried he was about his failed role in the future. Moon Jong-bae asked the young man if he had time to prepare his foreign passport, because from next Sunday, they will continue filming in Paris itself. Kim Man-sung smiled and said that he had taken care of his passport a few weeks ago and was promised that it would be ready tomorrow. The manager also informed that today I will shoot only the opening scene, so he advised the young man to relax and be especially nervous on the first day. When the young actor was called to the set, the young man had to say goodbye to the manager. Moon Jong-bae waved at his ward and wished him luck. Kim Man-sung quickly ran to the main director and screenwriter. He bowed to his employers and introduced his name with the role. Kim In-suk greeted the young actor with not very nice words. She recalled that at the first reading of the script, the French young man was as terrifying as possible. The director reminded that the young man was adopted by a French family at the age of 5, and now he's over 20, so he had to improve his French as much as possible. The screenwriter suddenly intervened in the dialogue and calmed the woman down. He said that the dubbing moment has already been decided, so Kai Man-sun will be able to speak Korean. Kim In-suk warned the young actor that if he didn't brush up on his French skills for the next script, she would cut the number of his scenes. Kai Man-sun felt extremely uncomfortable on the set. He apologized and promised that he would fulfill all the hopes of the director. Suddenly, the interlocutors turned their attention to a bright girl who approached them. She was wearing a spring dress that she bought directly in Paris. Kim In-suk was impressed by the beauty of her main character. She immediately ran up to Song Hana and started praising her incredible beauty. Kim In-sung also had to admit that the woman looked incredibly beautiful. His body shook from how beautiful the heroine was. Meanwhile, a surprise was hiding behind the young man's back. Someone's hand was holding a can of soda and was about to surprise the young man. While the young actor was staring at Song Hana, someone placed a cold can of soda in front of his face, which literally shocked him. Kai Man-sung jumped in surprise. His cheek felt cold and he turned back to see what was going on. The young man saw in front of him a can with a carbonated drink called Respi. He immediately assumed that it could be his old acquaintance from filming. Turning his head back, the actor saw Ko-ju in front of him. The girl was incredibly happy to meet her colleague. Seeing the displeased look on the young man's face, she asked if he was really angry. Blushing a little, the actor replied that everything is fine. Ko-ju-an felt a little guilty and apologized for her behavior. She explained that she was just very happy to see her old acquaintance. The actors immediately found a common language and began to discuss the Respi drink. Ko-ju-en said that she even starred in an advertisement for this famous brand in Korea. Then the actors went to prepare for filming. The director asked Kim Man-sona, "Is he ready to act?" The young man shouted that there was only one last moment left. Having tied his wig on his head in a ponytail, the actor was completely ready. The young man was turned into a real street talent who spends all his time on the street. Kim In-suk ordered the entire crew to immediately take their places and start filming. The woman loved when the process happened as quickly as possible. Kim Man-sung, wasting no time, sat down at his workplace in the central street of Paris. In front of him was a canvas that was still empty. The director ordered to start filming and explained that it would be the opening scene where Kim Man-sung and Sung Ha-na go the same way, and Ko-ju-en to another. Kim Man-sun was still struggling with his French. Drops of sweat periodically appeared on his face from anxiety about his role. Song Ha-na, on the other hand, was as confident as possible in her abilities. She looked coldly at the director, waiting for the order to start shooting. Ko-ju-an, with a smile on her face, stood in her place and also waited for the order. She behaved as relaxed as possible and enjoyed the process. Kim In-suk, after a few seconds, shouted loudly, ordering the camera motor to turn on. Filming of the romantic series was announced to begin. Kim Man-sung immediately felt as if he was transported to the most romantic place in the old world, where one can see the Eiffel Tower in all its glory. The film crew around began to literally disappear before the eyes of the young actor. He completely moved to Paris, where it was calm and romantic. The young artist sat in his seat. Kim Man-sung slowly exhaled and reassured himself that Paris is much better than the Joseon era. Suddenly, the young man heard how a little girl ran up to him and greeted him in French, calling him an artist uncle. Kim Man-sung immediately glanced to the right in surprise. He knew the script by heart, but at that moment he was a little confused and just kept silent. The young artist saw in front of him a little fair-haired girl with bright blue eyes, who was kindly moving towards him. Having come as close as possible, the girl asked the artist if he could draw her. At that moment, the mother could barely catch up with the child. Kim Man-sung replied that he could draw the girl, but in return she had to obey her mother. The girl agreed and thanked the young artist. Kai Man-sun was just shocked when he heard his French. He could not even imagine that he would speak like a real Frenchman during filming. The girl's mother was incredibly grateful to the artist for his help, as he helped to calm the little one and fulfill her most secret desire. Kai Man-sun rejected his French side and now thought about what he should do with the picture because he did not succeed in the courses at all. The young actor froze in one place, holding the bone in his hand. He tried to remember all the instructions given to him by the teachers at the art school. The artist's bone, as if against its own will, began to move in the direction of the canvas. She was accompanied by an inner spirit that the actor could not control, instead of a key bone. On the set, Man-sun held a pencil as sharp as possible, ready to create a masterpiece together with his master. The young man just watched silently as his pencil touched the canvas. As gently as possible, he touched the paper and stopped for a few seconds. After that, the artistic instrument began to float like a ship on the sea, creating incredibly beautiful waves that were both similar and different at the same time. Key Man Song was just shocked as he watched his hand. He did nothing at all, but his hand drew a picture of its own accord. Despite the misunderstanding with himself, the actor was satisfied that he managed to master the skills in which he put a lot of his work. Now he could perfectly play a young artist in the central street of Paris. He painted the picture incessantly without stopping for a second. Literally in a few minutes, the artist's masterpiece was ready. The little girl was delighted with how beautiful she appeared on the young man's canvas. The mother, extremely satisfied, took her mother's hand and led her home. They took the picture with them, and the young artist remained sitting in his place. Suddenly, behind him, the young man heard a familiar female voice. The woman praised the artist for his drawing skills as she had been watching him for some time. Ki Man-sung immediately turns his head back to check who is behind him. He looked with surprised eyes at the figure in front of him. At first glance, he saw an incredibly beautiful woman's smile, around which lipstick was painted. The main character of the series appeared before the audience for the first time. Song Hana appeared in front of the cameras in her incredibly beautiful dress. Fixing her wind-blown hair, she asked the artist if he would like to paint her on canvas. Song Hana literally charmed the young man with her smile. She looked at him for a few seconds with her blue eyes. Kai Man-song continued to sit in his seat and did not understand what was happening. He looked back at the woman who had suddenly approached from behind. Song Hana did not understand why the artist did not respond to her at all. She spoke in Korean and asked if she had mistaken his nationality. Ki Man-song was about to answer when he suddenly stopped. He drew air into his lungs but did not manage to make a single sound. The young man suddenly remembered that according to the script, his character has a very bad Korean accent, so he can't just speak to the main character in Korean. Ki Man-song answered in French that his parents adopted him at an early age, so he does not speak Korean very well. Song Hana felt a little uncomfortable. She apologized to the young man, covering her face with her hand. She immediately rushed to compliment him on his incredible artistic skill. Ki Man-song smiled and replied that this incident can be forgotten immediately. The young man quickly changed the topic of conversation and returned to his hobby. The artist asked a random passerby if she would like to receive her portrait. Song Hana smiled and replied that she would not refuse. Ki Man-song told the girl to sit across from him. He took up his pencil again and began to look closely at the facial features of this model. Song Hana sat motionless in one place across from the young man and looked straight at him. She smiled slightly with the tips of her beautiful lips. Ki Man-song periodically looked out from behind his canvas to better see the features of the woman he wanted to paint perfectly. Song Hana continued to sit in her seat and did not move. Her smile fell a little over time as the muscles in her face tired. Ki Man-song continued to look out from behind his painting, his eyes piercing the face of a model whose looks could not be surpassed. Song Hana had bright blue eyes like the sea. It was difficult to measure their depth with just one look, so the artist looked there several times. Ki Man-song looked at the bright blue sea in the girl's eyes. The young man had brown eyes and wondered why God did not reward him with blue. Song Hana suddenly noticed the artist staring straight into her eyes. She opened her eyes wide as she felt a little scared. The girl was embarrassed and her cheeks turned red. She looked down. It worked by itself like a protective reaction from too much attention. Ki Man-song continued drawing the girl without saying a word. He was completely satisfied with everything, especially the last pose of his model. While the young artist was painting the main character, Ko-ju, on the streets of Paris, Anne was walking down the street with a backpack on her shoulders and saw a painting. After the last shot, the director announced the end of the filming of this scene. Now the actors could relax and go on vacation. The buildings, which were built exclusively for the filming of this film, were completely empty on the other side so as not to waste a lot of material. Finishing the scene, Song Hana looked completely indifferently in the direction of the young man, who for some reason still continued to finish the picture. Ko-ju Ann decided to approach the actor to check everything. Seeing the picture with her own eyes, the girl was simply shocked at how similar it was. Ko-ju Ann asked her old friend where he learned to draw like that. She had no idea that the young man had such a powerful hidden talent. Song Hana decided to also check what kind of painting there was. She saw herself and was shocked but showed no emotion. The main director, together with the editor, also decided to approach the screen. They wondered if the young man really drew incredibly well. Kim In-suk was now ready to give the young actor much more opportunity to prove himself. She promised to film more with the participation of Ki Man-sona. The director suddenly remembered one important scene. She decided to ask the young man if he sometimes plays the piano, at least a little. Kim In-sung did not understand anything at all. The woman explained that according to the script, his character's father was an artist, and his mother was a pianist, so it needed to be demonstrated somehow. The screenwriter said that the pianist could play backup there. However, the director objected that the understudy would be too visible in the editing, so a first-rate actor was needed. Suddenly, the dispute between the two main directors of the film was interrupted by a young actor. Kim In-sung said that he can really play the piano. The young man didn't know why he said that in the first place, but he assumed that if he learned how to draw, then the piano during filming could also cope. Kim In-suk was incredibly pleased with this turn of events. Now her film will be even better because it is possible not to use stuntmen. Seong Hana was still standing by the painting, looking at her portrait. She could not understand how the young man managed to depict her features so accurately. It is known that the actress suddenly lowered her gaze on the young man. Her emotions were exactly the same. She never showed her hidden inner world. Song Hana stared at the back of the young artist played by Kim In-sung. She wondered where he really got so many talents. The woman literally began to lose the position of the main character, as more and more attention was focused on the young and talented guy. After standing still for a few more seconds, the main character moved from her seat and headed home, as the first day of filming was over. The director and screenwriter suddenly remembered their main star. They caught up with her and said that the actress's performance today was simply incredible. They continued to praise her, naming all the positive traits. Song Hana didn't pay attention to anything at all, and continued to walk on indifferently. Kim In-sung watched the famous actress and her employers try to correct their mistake and give the woman more attention. It didn't matter at all. He decided to take the chair and go home as well. Suddenly, a friend came up to him and expressed her incredible surprise. Ko Ju-an looked into the young actor's eyes and called him an incredible master of the game, whom she had not met before in her entire short career. The girl was surprised that as soon as the engine starts, the young man seems to become a different person. She couldn't understand how it was possible to forget about reality. Ko Ju-an was not going to ask the young man about his methods, but simply advised. She said goodbye and said that she would look forward to their meeting at the next filming. Kim In-sung did not say a word during this whole dialogue. He simply raised his hand at the end and said goodbye to the girl until the next shooting in Paris. As soon as the young man said goodbye to his partner, he was immediately knocked off his feet by a man. He immediately caught him so that he would not fall. This man turned out to be Moon's manager, John Bae-yi. He expressed incredible admiration for his wards, who played today to the highest score. The manager liked literally everything: the picture, French, and acting in general. He believed that the young man would one day reveal the name of his star to the world. The next shooting in Paris was to take place in 2 weeks. Time passed very quickly and the actors were already on a plane to visit the capital of France. Entertainment's private jet was nearly empty. There were not enough film crews to cover all the space in the plane. Kai Man-song sat in his seat and reread the magazines. Opposite him, a man was sleeping on the spot, snoring too loudly, although he did not disturb anyone. A flight attendant unexpectedly approached the young actor. She smiled kindly and asked the young man if he wanted something to drink. The conversation was in French, so Kim In-sung was forced to use this language again. He refused drinks on the plane. The young man was a little shocked that in reality he could also use his character's skills. His French in life was simply unsurpassed. Kai In-sung reflected on the fact that he was becoming like his characters. At such rates, he thought about conquering the heart of the main character. The young man quickly dispelled his not-so-modest thoughts. He shook his head to spare her the final scene where he is with Song Hana. Of course, his thoughts did not end there. The young actor wanted to know why something that cannot even be explained is happening to him. Kim In-sung fixed his gaze on the window of the plane. For several seconds, he just stared at one point, not noticing anything at all. When his gaze diverged a little, the young man saw an incredibly beautiful city in the window. They finally flew to France in a few hours. Kim In-sung put his hand to the glass and saw the Eiffel Tower in front of him. From a bird's-eye view, the tower seemed very beautiful and incredibly tall. The young man watched the narrow streets of Paris and thought about the fact that today he would have to play a role for which he was completely unprepared. There were also passengers in another class of the same plane. Here you could even rest. Some members of the film crew did something. Song Hana sat in her seat and read a book. When she got bored, the famous actress decided to put her next to her, not noticing the seat. It turned out that the seat ended several centimeters back. The textbook flew to the floor and the piece of paper that served as a bookmark flew out. The book landed earlier than the paper because of its weight. The unknown leaf continued to fly down like an airplane landing. Song Hana decided not to let this piece of paper land. She suddenly put her hand out in front of her and grabbed a sheet of paper, clutching it tightly. The actress did not want anyone from her crew or actors to see her piece of paper. She looked around where there was absolute silence. Today's actress was dressed as simply as possible. Catching the piece of paper, she looked at it as if not knowing what to do with it. After sitting in a motionless position for a few seconds, Song Hana still decided to open a sheet of paper, which contained something very interesting. A famous actress with incredible fame and huge fees wore a portrait in her book, drawn by a completely unknown young actor. She was a little ashamed of it, so she decided that no one would see it. That is why she grabbed the lost piece of paper so sharply. Song Hana, like her colleague, tried to get away from obsessive thoughts. She looked out the window of the plane to distract herself. The actress also put her hand to the glass and saw Paris in front of her with its narrow streets and incredible architecture on them. The cruise plane finally landed in Paris. Actors and directors famous in East Asia came to conquer the old world. Unloading very quickly. For the first scene, an easel was needed behind which a young French artist sat. The film crew tried to establish contact with each other. They very quickly stretched the wires all over the set so as not to waste any time. Loudspeakers were also prepared in tempo. Everyone tried their best to do their job within the limits given by the head director. Costume managers prepared the actors in just a few minutes. The main character could not be recognized after her next reincarnation. Kai Man-sun took the least amount of time to prepare. Literally in a minute, he was already sitting at his easel and looking at the blank canvas. The director and screenwriter approached the young man, who informed the young actor about the tight schedule in Paris, where they needed to shoot 4 episodes. Just in case, Kim In-suk asked the young man if he had changed his mind about playing the piano. Ki Man-song replied uncertainly that he was ready to play. After hearing the response from the main actor of this scene, the writer said that today they will shoot the first scene involving Ko Ju-in. The chief director ordered the film crew to get ready and shouted loudly, announcing the start of filming with a young artist and a passing stranger. Ki Man-sun immediately got used to the role and sat down to paint in front of the easel. Song Hana was no longer on the horizon, only a small crowd of people. The young artist, despite the lack of models, continued to paint. He spent the whole day on one of the central streets of Paris. In the absence of portraits, Kai Man-sun began to draw everything that surrounded him. He began to draw the houses opposite. The young man thought about a phenomenon that constantly happens to him. He could not understand why such things happened only to him and did not affect other actors. Suddenly addressed him and asked if he was Korean by chance. Ko Ju-in played the role of the younger sister of the main character Woo Hek in this film. She pointed to the map and asked the artist if he knew the location of this house. Ki Man-sun didn't answer the girl at all, and she concluded that he really wasn't Korean. The young man just silently stared at the ill-dressed girl. The young actor knew what Ko Ju really was. According to the script, N comes from a noble family of entrepreneurs. The girl moved away from the artist and thought about the nationality of the young man. Ki Man-song suddenly stood up from his seat when the girl left. He took with him a canvas on which he painted an unfinished picture. The young man quickly packed his things into a backpack. He folded up his chair, then began to assemble the easel that held each of his paintings. Meanwhile, Ko Ju-in began looking for people in Paris who knew Korean. She needed to find the house that was marked on her map. Kai Man-song knew that according to the script, the girl should stay at his house for a month. He caught up with her and tapped her on the shoulder. Ko Ju-in was a little scared and immediately turned back. She was a little surprised to see the already familiar face of an Asian artist in front of her. Ki Man-sung didn't say a word because he didn't speak Korean well according to the script. He simply pointed a finger behind his back, inviting the girl to follow him. Ko Ju. According to the script, N was supposed to fall in love with a young artist, but the young man himself was not sure that the script would go according to the plan of the director and screenwriter. Ki Man-sun suddenly stopped and looked at the girl, but in turn she got a little scared and asked what was wrong with her. In fact, only the artist behaved strangely. 2 young people went to a private house on the outskirts of Paris. They walked forward, hardly speaking, and finally found themselves at their final destination. Ki Man-song was quite polite and invited the girl to his house. They immediately came to the kitchen where they could have a snack after a hard and long day. The mother of the young artist was a very nice woman. She fed and gave water to an unknown girl, and even during dinner she constantly smiled at her. Ki Man-sun watched his guest with a frightened look, who was eating dinner very loudly. In their family, it was customary to keep oneself in one's hands at the table. Ko Ju-in, on the other hand, did not know any nutritional education. She was sitting at the table and was swallowing food very loudly, as if she had not eaten for several days. With a smile, the girl remembered today's incident when she mistook the young man for a Korean and then realized that she was simply mistaken about his appearance. The mother replied that she had started learning Korean herself for Julian's sake, but her son himself was not at all inclined to learn the native language. Ki Man-song turned away from his mother because he didn't want to go back to the language conflict again. He really didn't want to learn Korean. Ko-ju-en watched the young artist with rapt eyes. She wanted to start a dialogue with him somehow, but she didn't know French at all. The mother offered the girl to stay with them for a while. She hoped that the stranger would become a very good friend for Julian and make him speak Korean. Ko-ju-an simply could not refuse such an offer. She agreed to be friends with the young man and in return offered to be her personal guide. Ko-ju-an could not simply lose the opportunity to explore perhaps the most famous capital in the world for free and made the most of the situation. Julian was not happy that the women had already discussed everything among themselves. He did not understand some phrases, but he was able to catch the key ones. When the family had dinner, the sun had almost set below the horizon. In the summertime, it sat down much later, so there was still a lot of time left for a walk. Ko-ju-an took a personal guide with her, and they went for a walk through evening Paris. Ki Man-song was constantly lagging behind the girl. She, in turn, tried to open a dialogue and constantly asked about various buildings and structures, but Julian was always silent. Young people walked almost until dark in the evening. Finally, they decided to go to an ice cream shop to eat something delicious before going to bed. Ko-ju-an didn't speak French very well, but her skills were good enough to order her favorite strawberry ice cream. Ki Man-sun, in turn, ordered absolutely nothing. He was constantly silent and wanted to get home as soon as possible to go to bed. Ko-ju-an hurried home at an accelerated pace. The young man constantly walked behind her, lagging a few meters behind as if wanting to get rid of her. The young people reached an outstanding building on the outskirts of Paris. It was a Gothic-style castle that was built long before modern France. A small park was located near this castle, where people could relax in the evening, clearing their brains from the day's worries. The park was very crowded. A juggler in a striped suit was located right in the middle of the square. He juggled balls and delighted people with his performance. Ko-ju-an and Julian decided to visit this park as well. They sat down on a bench and began to observe what was happening around. The girl constantly tried to start a conversation, but in response she heard only standard phrases in Korean. Ki Man-song didn't want to talk at all today. He just watched the flow of people that were constantly changing. Some have already gone home with their children, and some have just returned after a hard day's work. A piano was located almost in the middle of the park. The musical instrument stood completely untouched and was waiting for someone who could entertain the surrounding audience. Ko-ju-an immediately noticed the piano in the middle of the park. She liked this idea and asked the young man if he could play the piano. Ki Man-song himself did not know why it was there. The young man shrugged his shoulders and let the girl know that she would not get an answer to her question. Ko-ju-an decided not to wait and went to the musical instrument herself. She was an amateur at playing the piano, so she could not play a specific melody. Ki Man-song approached the musical instrument with his companion. He stood nearby and watched as the girl briefly pressed the keys. Julian felt a not very pure melody. Despite this, the young man still listened silently and waited until Ko-ju-en will finish his song. Ki. At that moment, Man-song remembered that according to the script he should play Chopin. He didn't really want to do that, as he was literally walking into the void. He also remembered that it was after this piano playing by Miss Ju-en will fall in love with his character and seek his attention. Glancing to his right, Julian saw a man who, according to the script, was the director of the orchestra where the minor character would be invited to audition. Ki Man-sun wondered if he could play the piano. He had never been drawn to musical instruments in his life, and therefore was very afraid. When Ko-ju-an finally finished her melody, a young man approached the piano. The girl was very surprised when she saw her companion next to her. She decided not to interfere and to step aside. The young actor hit the keys with his fingers and began to play the most famous melody of the legendary Chopin. Ki Man-song has once again outdone himself in this situation. His fingers began to run quickly over the keys, changing the key and octaves at an incredible pace. Ko-ju-an was simply shocked when she heard Chopin's melody performed flawlessly. She had never heard anything like it in her life. Julian played a musical instrument regardless of anyone. He was alone with his piano, as if his mind was in another reality. People heard an incredible melody and began to gather around the piano. They formed a circle from where anyone could listen to the talented young man. In this world, Ki Man-song played the role of the young talent Julian. He became more and more like him, living his life. Ki Man-song continued to play the piano, without even noticing. He literally did not have time to follow the fingers that were running on the keys with their own hands. People who surrounded the musical instrument around were pleasantly surprised. They listened to the melody with their mouths open and stood motionless. The master wielded his instrument skillfully and made the melody work for him. She rushed up and lifted the spirits of hundreds of people around. Among such people was the conductor of the orchestra, whom the hero mentioned earlier. He was also impressed by the talent of the young man who performed in the night square of the park. Far from the circle of spectators, a lone female figure could be observed carelessly moving forward and completely oblivious to the outside world. Hearing Chopin's melody, the young girl immediately stopped chewing gum and began to listen to the piano, which sounded incredible in the hands of the master. Kiman's song was not thinking about anything at all at this moment. His soul completely belonged to the instrument that he managed to conquer in one evening. After playing the last chord, the young man slowly took his hands off the keys. There was complete silence around. Absolutely no one made a sound. Kiman's song slowly lowered his hands down and simultaneously clenched them into fists. He did it like a real master after a solo concert in a huge stadium. The musician sat motionless in his place for a few seconds, keeping his hands on his knees. He was in no hurry to get up, as if waiting for something from the listeners. Meanwhile, in the crowd of people, a pigeon was calmly strolling. He ate the crumbs that people left behind and also tried to beg for more food. Suddenly, the bird heard loud applause and was scared to death. He did not understand what was happening and began to turn his head in different directions. Kiman's song caught the loudest ovation from those around him, which scared the innocent pigeon. He flapped his wings and flew away from the noisy park. The pigeon left behind only fallen feathers. Meanwhile, people continued to applaud the talented young man who won their hearts this evening. When the dove's feathers disappeared from the shot of the mountain, the director informed the entire crew that the scene had been successfully filmed. However, the applause around did not stop. It turned out that even the creators of this film did not expect such success. They applauded the minor actor who played Chopin's melody perfectly. Kojuan watched the young man with her mouth wide open. She was once again shocked by what her old acquaintance demonstrated. Even world-famous star song Ha Na was impressed by this performance. She did not dare to applaud, but showed her sincere admiration. After finishing playing the piano, Kiman's song looked straight ahead with frightened eyes, as if frightened by what he had just played. The young actor looked at his hands, which began to tremble. Kiman's song did not understand anything, and wondered who he really was now.